Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Bench Boss podcast. My name is Matt, and I'll be the Bench Boss today. And man, we've got a lot to cover in this episode. Today, we're going to be covering the Tom Wilson suspension, the injury bug hitting many teams very hard already at the beginning of the season, Gritty, the Flyers mascot, the Shea Theodore contract, Jack Eichel and Eichel and Lee captaincies. And then we're going to get into the rest of the previews for the regular season. This is probably going to be a little bit of a longer podcast, and most won't be this long, but I just want to get all these previews out of the way before I get going with some of the main stories in the NHL. So let's start off with the Tom Wilson suspension. It occurred during the preseason where Oskar Sundqvist had the puck skating into the slot, about to take a shot on net, when Tom Wilson comes out of nowhere from center ice, takes several strides towards Sundqvist, and goes in almost arm to elbow first, and the target area is basically Sundqvist's head. And Sundqvist immediately goes down to the ice, covers his head, he has no idea where he's at, and Tom Wilson's just standing there saying, "Oh, what did I do?" As a result of this, he receives a 20-game suspension, which is one of the longest suspensions for a hit in NHL history. We haven't seen a suspension like this since Raffi Torres received 26 games for his terrible hit. And you have to wonder if this is more of a message to Tom Wilson and the rest of the league versus an increment in penalties and suspensions throughout the league as a major rule of enforcement. Now, do I agree with the suspension? Oh, absolutely. I know he's only been suspended 3 times before this, but they've all been within a year. And I'm not sure what's going on with his behavior, but it was clearly an intent to injure. He's going in right at the head. And I'm not sure what the deal is. Tom Wilson has a great skill set for the game of hockey, but he's gaining a reputation right now where he is looking like the villain every single night. Everyone hates him. He's getting booed every single arena he's going to, and I don't think he wants that. That's not good to have, and that's not good for the league. An interesting thing about these suspensions is 3 out of 4 of his suspensions have come in the preseason against the St. Louis Blues. In 2017, he was banned 2 preseason games for a hit against Robert Thomas. 2017 again in a different game against the Blues in the preseason, Wilson was suspended for 4 games for his hit against Sammy Blais. And then last playoffs, we just saw him get a 3 playoff game suspension versus Pittsburgh when he broke Ashton Reach's jaw and gave him a concussion right when he got off the bench. I don't know if he has something against St. Louis, but I don't see a rivalry there at all, so I'm just thinking this is more of him. This is terrible for him. He relatively hasn't had a great career so far, point production-wise. And Washington was looking for him to kind of turn into the next version of Milan Lucic, where he could score 20, 30 goals a season, but also be that intimidating factor on the ice. And we haven't really seen that yet until this playoffs. In 21 games, Tom Wilson had 15 points and was a very key contributor to their Stanley Cup run. So when you're playing on the first line with Ovechkin and Kuznetsov, they're looking to him to be a leader. You finally got your first line minutes. You're playing with 1 definite Hall of Famer, and if Kuznetsov keeps up these numbers for the rest of, another good 10 years, he could be a Hall of Famer. You're playing with 2 superstars, and you're going around hitting people during the preseason trying to injure them. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the correct thing to do, and, I agree with the suspension. If people are going to keep making these hits, I think you need to suspend them. A lot of people are for the idea of people being suspended for the amount of time that person's injured, depending on how ruthless the hit is. This was clearly a ruthless hit, and, clearly 2 to 4 games haven't been really affecting Wilson. It seems like, I'll just come back and, I'll be sad for a couple of games and then I'll go in for the hit. No. Now he's going to sit there for 20 games. He's out a quarter of the season. That's huge. A lot of teams look for the, November point, late November, Thanksgiving time, to determine whether or not their team's really going to make the playoffs or not. Now, Washington doesn't have to worry about this because their team's stacked. They're going to make the playoffs this year unless something ultimately devastating happens. But that quarter point of the season is when a lot of general managers look at their team and say, I don't think we're going to make the playoffs. We need to start thinking whether we're going to rebuild, whether we need to make a trade, what's going on here. Because if we're not good by the halfway point, then we're definitely not making the playoffs. He's ultimately out for the entire quarter point process. So if Washington were to struggle mightily, who knows what he could have contributed? Who knows what space he could have created on the first line with Ovechkin and Kuznetsov to let them do their thing. It's not good for him. He just blew his opportunity. So up next we have the next segment, which will be the injury bug, which this preseason has been pretty ruthless to teams. And unfortunately, I have to look back and say Anaheim's getting the worst of this. Maybe Ottawa, but Anaheim's definitely up there. It starts off with Corey Perry receiving a 5-month injury status with an MCL tear and an injured meniscus, followed by Ondrej Kase out indefinitely with a concussion. Anaheim's already missing Ryan Kesler due to injury, and they're missing Ritchie due to contract issues. They don't know if Patrick Eaves is going to come back soon. He missed all of last year. They're hoping he can come back this year and play a pivotal role in their offense, but it's not looking like that right now. Now, they did win last night against San Jose, but it wasn't a convincing win. San Jose dominated the most of that game. Gibson had to stand on his head. You don't want that to be the rest of the season. You don't want Gibson to have to stand on his head the whole time. He's had injury issues himself, so if you want to avoid injuries, you might want the team to start playing better. Corey Perry's already been the center of many trade rumors. His 5-month injury, how does that affect his trade value? If he comes back and he struggles, he's definitely not getting traded. And you can't trade Ryan Getzlaf. With Ondrej Kase, he had a great first season last year. He really came out and was one of the players that helped provide secondary offense for a team that was struggling to score goals. Now he's out indefinitely with a concussion. And we've seen with many players around the league, when they receive a concussion and they come back to the NHL to start playing again, they don't have it. They don't come back instantly and start providing goals again. It takes a long time for them to catch up. When you have a concussion, you slow down. Everything just feels different. It looks different. It takes a long time to recover from a concussion. So you hope this doesn't hamper his development when he was looking like a very strong secondary scoring option for a team that was really, really struggling to score goals. If we're looking at a bright spot for this, Max Comtois and Sam Steele look like they're going to be able to help replace and supplant that goal scoring for a little bit. Last night, Comtois had a great shot on net for his first goal of the season. If he can keep that up, that's great. One of the interesting injuries right now is Seth Jones being out 4 to 6 weeks with an MCL sprain. It doesn't seem too severe by what they're saying, but this is really his year to become a Norris Trophy candidate in the NHL. Last year, many teams were looking around, and many reporters around the league were looking at Jones and saying, you know what, he's really stepped up this year. He looks fantastic. He and Werenski are definitely the future of this team. A lot of teams are looking at them and saying, they remind me of when Anaheim had Scott Niedermayer and Chris Pronger. 2 superstar defensemen in the making here, and with Jones out, it puts a lot of pressure on Werenski, but you feel bad because it's slowing down Jones's progress. He could have become a candidate for a Norris Trophy this year, and I don't think it's possible to receive that candidacy after missing a month to 2 months. But as long as he comes back healthy and can provide some spark to Columbus, that would be huge. The issue here is Columbus was 25th in the power play last season, and they were 26th in penalty killing last year when they had Jones in the lineup. This team struggles mightily on special teams, and without him there, they're really going to struggle. So unless they can really step up their 5-on-5 play, or they can develop some new special team strategies, I really don't see them kind of getting through this for a little bit. They might struggle out of the gate this season, and that's not really encouraging for a team that's really trying to make a statement this year, try to keep Panarin here, and try to keep Bobrovsky here so they don't sign away. The next injury is Torrey Krug out 3 to 4 weeks with his left ankle injury. Now, this is the same ankle that he injured versus Tampa Bay in the playoffs, and if any of you remember, Torrey Krug had a stellar year last year for Boston. He had 60 points as a defenseman, anchored their power play to 4th in the NHL, and Boston was really known as a transition team who could go from defense to offense very quickly. Torrey Krug was a big part of that, and when he's out for a month with the left ankle injury, who's going to replace him out there to provide that quick pass to the Bergeron line to try to get some goals? Many fans were thinking it was going to be Urho Vakanainen to step in. He had a great preseason. Many people thought he was the best player in the preseason for the Boston Bruins. Cassidy liked him, press liked him, but you have so many defensemen where most likely the person stepping up is going to be John Moore or Matt Grzelcyk. Grzelcyk had a great year last year. He and Miller were stellar together as a third-line D pairing. John Moore has to prove himself right now. A lot of people are saying, you know what, we have to give him a chance. Maybe this is his time to prove he can be that puck-moving defenseman as well. It also gives Charlie McAvoy a chance to run the power play for a month. Last season, one of the things people looked at with McAvoy was he was great 5-on-5, great on the penalty kill, but he didn't really get a shot on the power play, and it's understandable. If you look at the Bruins' first power play unit, they're stacked, and when they're trying to score goals, it's not like they're going to try to get the second power play unit out there very often. So this kind of gives McAvoy a good look at the power play, give him some experience running it with some higher-end talent, and if he can develop that into his game, then he's just going to become even better for the Bruins and eventually Norris Trophy candidate for himself. Now, one of the most controversial injuries this preseason is Robbie Fabry for the St. Louis Blues. Now, he didn't re-injure his knee. It's a groin tear. But he has been injured a lot in his young career. The last time he played was the 2016-2017 season. He missed all of last season with an ACL injury to his left knee. And the season before that, he injured his left knee as well. Same ACL. What happens with him? They were really expecting him to become a second-line player, maybe a first-line player, to get maybe 50, 60 points a season. He's a very shifty, powerful skater, but with his knee injury, you put a lot of pressure on your knee when you're that kind of skater, and I don't know if this hampers his game for the future. I don't know if this really detriments his playing ability. We'll have to see when he comes back. It looks like he will be back soon, but he has a lot to prove right now, and a lot of fans have been disappointed. It's hard to be disappointed with somebody when they're injured. You can't really say, oh, you should come back. I know you can't, walk or skate or move your leg, but unfortunately, out of this whole list of injured players, I do think Robbie Fabry is the one that has the most to prove that he can play with the Blues. Their team is stacked this year, and I think he'd love to be a part of that. One of the more unfortunate injuries this preseason was Alex Galchenyuk for the Arizona Coyotes, where he's listed as week-to-week with a lower body injury. This really hurts Galchenyuk, where he was ostracized in Montreal, and tabloids were everywhere. Oh, he's always faking injury. Oh, he has cocaine issue, and I don't think any of that's real. But what I do think is real is this is his chance to escape a very, very crazed market and get a deep breath of fresh air in Arizona and reestablish who he is as a player and play with some good talent up front, some good young talent to redevelop his game and become the player I think he envisions himself becoming. Many people know he's a 30-goal scorer. He's done it before. Arizona was really looking forward to him to help the power play, develop some chemistry with the new team, and potentially play with Keller. We'll have to see what happens when he comes back. This next injury is one of the more frustrating ones, especially for the Islanders and Islander fans themselves. Andrew Ladd is out indefinitely with the incredibly descriptive upper body area strain. How vague is that? I'm getting so tired of seeing teams list people out. Oh, part of their body is injured. They strained a part of their body, and they're really struggling to come back. What is that? Stop doing that. That's annoying. I don't know. I want to hear like their leg is injured, and I know they're trying to protect their players because if they say, "Oh, he's coming back from a knee injury," and someone gets mad and hits them in that knee, they're out. But this is just getting a little pathetic. I don't know if this is the Bill Belichick thing from the NFL where they're like, "Oh, he's injured. He hurt his upper quadrant." area of the body in this vicinity. But I don't know, I'm just getting tired of hearing that. What's even more frustrating than that is Andrew Ladd himself with a complete bust of a contract. He is still signed until 2023 and has not produced over 34 points in a season since 2014. He's underproducing incredibly right now for a team that is struggling. This team's only made the playoff once in the past several years. They've struggled with a terrible general manager, terrible ownership, a terrible new arena, and they've lost John Tavares. They need a lot of offense. They need leadership. They just lost their captain. Andrew Ladd needs to be this guy. He needs to come in there and be the person who looks at these young players like Anders Lee, Matt Barzal, and say, okay, this is how you become a professional. This is how you play in the NHL. This is how you play on the power play, penalty kill. You have to have that kind of leader on your team. And I just don't see him doing it. I don't see him performing on the ice properly or off the ice properly to get this going. This contract's been terrible. To end the injury segment, we have to go to Ottawa, where if they haven't suffered enough this offseason, they've suffered even more with the injuries to J.G. Pageau and Marian Gaborik. Pageau's out 6 months with a torn Achilles tendon, and Marian Gaborik's out indefinitely due to back surgery to fix a herniated disc. This is really tough because Pageau had the chance to play on the first line this year. I think he's a very speedy winger who the fans love. I remember he scored a hat trick, and all the fans are chanting, Pageau, 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 Pageau. Like, this is great. You need a player like that on your team. For a team like Ottawa, who's struggling to fill their stadium seats, even when they're in the Eastern Conference Finals, when you have a guy like that on your team, you love to cheer for him. You need players that you love to cheer for. With him out, that really hurts. Marian Gaborik, I don't think was going to have a significant impact on this team, but he is a sniper. He's a bona fide goal scorer, and maybe he could have been a leader to some of the younger players on the team, like a Brady Tkachuk, who may be looking to say, okay, I've scored at younger levels, but how do you produce at the NHL level consistently? He could turn to Gaborik, watch him prepare for games, watch him play on the ice, and say, you know what? I really need to adopt some of those moves. That's awesome. So unfortunately, Ottawa does find themselves in a tight spot, but you kind of hope some of the other players step up, and we'll talk about that later in the segment when we give them a season preview. So one of the more exciting things that's happened this offseason is the Philadelphia Flyers finally getting a team mascot. His name is Gritty, and he is an incredible addition to the NHL. I think he took the NHL by storm. I think he took social media by storm. And I think the Flyers marketing team did an incredible job launching Gritty onto the scene like Vegas did with their social media accounts. It was an aggressive approach, and it went viral fast. Great idea. He reproduced several meme photos. I think the most memorable one is the Kim Kardashian photo with the champagne going into the back. Of course, he's sitting there with a Gatorade bottle going into the cup in the back of his pants, but that's perfect. I think you need something like that. Philadelphia is such a prestigious place to play hockey, but it's also a very manic place to play hockey, where it's a very hectic atmosphere. It's loud, it's angry, it's passionate, and this guy just completely sums up the whole thing. I remember seeing him. I was watching the preseason game with the Flyers versus the Rangers, and they showed during the intermission report a bunch of goalies are skating around, and Gritty's going around hip-checking him into the boards. And as he turns around to go back and hit another one, his stupid eyes are moving around like little googly eyes the whole time. That's hilarious. Who the hell thought of this? He's just sitting there, his mouth's wide open. It's like you're staring at a Christmas ham and you haven't eaten in months. And you're insane. This is 100% him. I love it. Instantly, he's a top 5 mascot in the NHL, maybe in sports, to be honest with you. Great personality. A lot of teams just have these random mascots that look like their team, like a bear or something. Like, you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have the polar bear, and you're like, oh, this has nothing to do with Leafs, and He's not funny. There's no personality to it. I think Sharky from the Sharks has his own Facebook account, Twitter account. He's all over the place. The guy from the Kings, he's all over the place. But you never really see anyone else kind of going around just being incredible. And Gritty automatically propels himself up the charts and is one of the best in the NHL. Now, one of the stories we talked about for the first episode of the podcast was the fact that Vegas really needed to do something with Shea Theodore. He's going to be their number one defenseman one day, very soon in fact, and he wasn't signed yet. One of their goals this season was to get him signed. Well, you've got it. Shea Theodore signs a 7-year, $36.4 million contract extension, and that locks him up with the rest of the players who have been signed this offseason that we mentioned earlier, which is great. I think one of the struggles with Vegas so far, even though they haven't struggled at all really, was to identify their core. I don't think McPhee knew he was going to have to create a core of players this fast, because he mainly just drafted people in the expansion draft to be traded immediately for picks at the deadline. And who knew they were going to reach the Stanley Cup Finals? Now you have a guy like Shea Theodore, who I mentioned last time was going to be their prize of the draft. Anaheim was kicking themselves for having to lose Theodore. He's going to be their number one defenseman soon. Right now, their top four looks amazing. And when Schmidt comes back, they're really going to look good. Their top five is going to be stellar. Holden's kind of the odd one out right now, but it's not like he's a terrible defenseman. Wrapping up the top stories this preseason, Jack Eichel becomes captain of the Buffalo Sabres. I think everyone expected this. For a player so young as Eichel, he seems to have a lot of pull within that organization. You heard about him complain about his former GM, his former coach, both gone instantly. I think he realizes he has a voice on the team. And when you have a player like that who has a voice in the locker room, within the organization, and on the ice, you kind of have to give him captaincy. Whether people look at him as a spoiled brat with that mentality, that's not really of any concern. I think Eichel's just very passionate about the game. I think he's passionate about winning. I think he's used to winning. He's come from several programs growing up where he was the best player on the team. They're constantly winning. They're competing. They have a chance to win the championship of that specific league they're in. And so far, Buffalo has not done a good job surrounding him with talent until this season. And we're going to touch on that later in the podcast. But until then, he's kind of been on an island. And when you're that passionate about winning and you know you're that talented, you have to have a voice. So I do think he's done a good job so far, and I think handing him captain of the team makes perfect sense. It was either going to be him or Ristolainen. I guess you can't really go wrong either way, but I think Eichel definitely has that voice that you're looking for in a leader on that team. Now the day after that, Anders Lee for the New York Islanders becomes their next captain. I remember reading when Tavares signed with the Leafs, looking at some of the Facebook comments, reading some blogs, listening to some news reports. A lot of fans wanted Anders Lee to be captain of the team. He seems to have a big voice there. He has a lot of talent. Last year he had a stellar season, scoring over 40 goals. He plays well on the ice. He's a leader on the ice, and he's a leader off the ice. This makes perfect sense, and I think he's more vocal than Tavares was. So this could be a very good move for a team that's trying to move in a different direction, and if he's going to be the voice along with Barzal in the future, then this is perfect. I think they had other options, maybe with Bailey, maybe with Johnny Boychuk, Nick Leddy, but when you're looking for a player with this kind of voice on the team, on and off the ice, leads by example, and he's young, you're kind of looking for that on a team that's trying to rebuild. He's going to go through the rebuild with the team, and hopefully when they start making the playoffs, if this keeps working out for them, which I think it will, they have Wallstrom coming up, they have a lot of talent. He's going to be there to say, look, I came from the bad, we're in the good right now, and if there's a young player that's not doing well, he can sit in there and say, you know what, the way you're acting right now doesn't help teams get to the playoffs. You need to act this certain way, or else they're just not going to make it. So I like these moves. And I think it's interesting that both the Sabres and the Islanders decided to pick captains when you have several teams around the NHL who aren't playing with captains. The Maple Leafs are one that's constantly scrutinized as a team that doesn't have a captain right now. They're like, oh, is Matthews going to be captain? Well, he's still really young. I think there is this onus on management to say, okay, who's the best player on the team? We're going to make him captain. And I don't necessarily like that idea. I thought years ago, Ovechkin with the Capitals, this is a beautiful example of it, where George McPhee sees Pittsburgh give Sidney Crosby captain of that team, and he's the youngest captain in the history of the game. But he was a leader at that age. He had control of that locker room at that age. I think players knew it. Bill Guerin was clearly more of a leader at that time, but really it was Crosby's team. When you're with the Capitals, Chris Clark was the captain of that team when Ovechkin was just dominating. I think Ovechkin's point production went down tremendously when he became captain of that team. He was getting over 100 points per season every season, 65 goals, 112 points, completely lighting the league up. But when he became captain, his stats dropped tremendously. He started putting all the pressure on himself. If any bad criticism came to the team, he would feel the brunt of it. If anyone criticized any player, he would say, look, I'm the captain, now you blamed it on me. And I don't think he was prepared for that. He was still learning English, basically. And I think he could have used a little bit more time under another leader on the team. Maybe you give it to Mike Knuble at that time, who was still with them before the concussion issues, and give him a chance to understand how you deflect pressure and negativity towards the team. How do you act as a leader through that pressure and arise from it? Over the past 10 years, his team has been scrutinized terribly for being tremendous regular season performers and then choking in the playoffs, especially in the second round to either Pittsburgh or New York. Those two teams just completely throttled Ovechkin and the Capitals. And finally this year they get over the hump. And they didn't even have their best regular season. Many people thought this was it for them. They kind of missed out after last year when they had over 120 points. They finally have it this year, and that's great for them. I think now Ovechkin's finally turned into that leader that McPhee and Leonosis wanted him to become. It just took a while. So getting back to the Sabres and the Islanders and some of these other teams, I think you really need to have that young talent who has the leadership voice and the leadership personality, because if you're just forcing it on a player, it's really not going to work. I kind of compare this when Joe Thornton was captain of the Bruins. He finally got over 100 points per season, and then they gave him the captaincy of the Bruins, and he just didn't produce well, and then he was gone. One of the worst trades in NHL history. I'm not a fan of it at all. But when he went to San Jose and wasn't captain, he completely lit up the league for a couple seasons, and then he became captain of the team. Once he became captain, his numbers dropped again. There are just some players who do not play as well because they're captain. It's the mentality thing, and they need someone to kind of show them how to be captain beforehand. So when you have a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs who are looking to find a captain, don't force it on one of these young players. You really can't do that. And we don't even know if Tavares was a great captain for the Islanders. I don't really think he was. A lot of fans don't think he was. So you can't just stick him on a team first game of the season. Oh, hey, you're captain. It's really tough to do. It's going to be a feeling out process, but I think Mike Babcock has a good idea of who actually is the leader of that team. And when the time comes, if he feels it's necessary to have that secondary voice, that actual captain who players look up to, he'll make the right decision. Alright, so up next we're going to have the rest of our season previews for the rest of the NHL. Starting off with the Central Division. Many people think the Central Division is the toughest division in the NHL. It certainly looks like it this season. So alphabetically, like last time, we'll start off with the Chicago Blackhawks. Last season was kind of rough for the Chicago Blackhawks. It was one of their worst finish in probably a decade. An injury to Corey Crawford early in the season completely derailed the season, where they often fought for who was going to play net. It was some of the worst goaltending we've seen in modern memory, and it ultimately led them missing the playoffs completely. The other main storyline for last season was Artemi Panarin for Brandon Saad turned out to be a major failure, where Panarin had an incredible season, a point-per-game player, and Saad underperformed completely. And I think people were looking for that trade to kind of boost Jonathan Toews' career back up. His numbers had been dipping, and they still are dipping. He hadn't had a great season since he was playing with Saad. So the hope was maybe he can re-spark his chemistry, but what ended up happening was both of them struggled, and Patrick Kane lost the person who he had the best time playing with in his career. You have Panarin there. He's constantly either at 100 or getting close to 100 points per season. Now he's much less. I think that really hurt the team. I think Kane struggled. I think Toews struggled. I think the whole team struggled without Marian Hossa there being one of their defensive specialists. And as a result, they didn't really do well. A lot of people are saying their defense struggled, and they did, but I think it's hard to play great defense when your goaltending is just so porous. No one's ever heard of their goaltenders before, and it just turned out to be a complete disaster for the team. Their major transactions this season were the return of Marcus Kruger with the Marian Hossa trade. They also acquired Brandon Manning, the person who injured Connor McDavid. They acquired Cam Ward as a potential backup to Crawford, and Chris Kunitz, coming in at almost 40 years of age. I don't really see these being good moves for the team. I think Brandon Manning's an average defenseman at best. People still hate him for his hit on McDavid. Cam Ward was the best move. They needed someone to back up Corey Crawford. The only issue is Crawford's still out, struggling with vertigo issues. So Cam Ward's automatically thrust into the spotlight here as the number one goalie again. I think he'd like this, but he hasn't really played well recently, and we don't know if that's because Carolina hasn't been great or he's just naturally on the decline because of his age. So this could be a good chance for him to prove himself the first month of the season and say, okay, you know what, I'm still a starter, I can do this, I'm playing with Chicago now, there's still some elite talent here, and this could be a chance for him to kind of blossom on the twilight of his career. Chicago finished the preseason with a terrible 2-4 record with Patrick Kane as their leading scorer with 5 points. Some of the biggest questions this preseason is Corey Crawford coming back? Supposedly he's targeting late October as a return, but you never know what's going to happen with vertigo issues. I remember with Anaheim, Jonas Hiller was a superb goaltender, but he ended up having vertigo issues and his career completely declined due to it, and he ended up leaving the NHL to play in the Swiss League. So I really hope this doesn't happen to Crawford, but we've seen vertigo issues really hurt goaltenders, where they need to be on balance, on par. When you have a vertigo issue, it kind of throws off your game completely and makes you uncomfortable to play in an arena. Can Brent Seabrook, Duncan Keith, and Jonathan Toews rebound? Toews has been struggling mightily in the past few seasons. He hasn't been looking like the franchise center that we once knew. During their dynasty run, he was the premier center, incredible power play player, better penalty killer, unbelievable two-way center, constantly up there with Anze Kopitar and Patrice Bergeron as the best three defensive two-way forwards in the NHL, and right now he hasn't been playing that way. A lot of people have been saying it's because of how gritty he plays, how hard he plays, and it's taking a toll on his body. Maybe he has the chance now, after missing the playoffs, to kind of recoup, regather himself, and say, okay, I've recovered, I'm ready to start playing well again. And it's not like he was sitting there saying, you know what, I'm going to play poorly this season. But when you have injuries and you're captain, you're proud, you're in charge of an original six hockey team. You can't just be like, I'm injured, I don't really want to play. He'll never say that. He wants to be out there every minute. And when he can't do that, that really hurts him. Is there a time where he needs to say, okay, I need to sit out for a bit if I'm injured? How does he recover? How do you get him to heal? This could be it. So hopefully this season's a rebound season for him. I know a lot of people have been tired of the Blackhawks, but this is the chance for him to kind of regain his status as a number one center in the NHL and a premier player in the NHL, someone that people look up to all the time. Now, Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook, those are different animals. Duncan Keith, I still think, has a lot of years left in him, although he's at the middle 30s. But he's not too far off of being a Conn Smythe winner either. It's tough to kind of look at these two players and say, oh, they're both struggling mightily, when it's hard to be motivated when your goaltenders are so terrible. This year, he has a chance with Ward and potentially Crawford coming back to regroup himself. Keith and Seabrook really need to rebound. I think Seabrook struggled more than Keith, but last year was terrible for the two of them. If they can't come back, then this team's in a lot of hurt right now. There's two big questions right now that is facing the Blackhawks. If they don't play well this season, is Joel Quenneville out? I don't think that would be a good idea if they do this. The reasoning behind this is if the Blackhawks do poorly, you have Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews making an incredible amount of money. The rest of their core is very old. They don't have a lot of good young talent on this team. As a GM, you want to protect these players. So if they do struggle, they're going to look back and say, okay, the easiest thing to do is fire the coach and then give their team another chance to rebuild and refocus and regroup. I don't think that's a good idea. I think Joel Quenneville's one of the best coaches to ever coach in the NHL. It's not like he's lost this team. I remember a couple seasons ago, I was watching the Bruins just completely not play well with Claude Julien. And I think people saw this happening, where he wasn't an effective coach. He wasn't bringing young players into the NHL. He was strictly playing veterans who were past their prime, not producing at all. And people were fed up with it. I'm looking around the NHL, and especially in Chicago, I don't see people being that frustrated with Joel Quenneville. Quenneville's been one of the most innovative coaches in the recent game. His transition game is fantastic. I think he took a lot of teams by surprise when he started coaching this team and saying, look, Duncan Keith can move the puck like a champion. We're going to make him the center of all of our offense. And he would just get the puck right out of the zone. Beautiful skater. And the team just took people by surprise. Very fast transition team. Very quick counterattack, but they're also dominant 5-on-5. I don't think you fire him. If there is an issue with this team and they don't play well, it's because Crawford isn't back yet and players aren't playing up to their contract value. I think Stan Bowman needs to take a sharp look at his team and say, okay, if they don't have it this year, do they need to make a rebuild? Do you have to trade one of these star players? Or are you just going to let them retire here and let the team go into mediocrity again? I think when you have a team like the Blackhawks who still have a ton of talent, but they don't have a lot of young talent. I mean, you have DeBrincat, but other than him, who are you really looking at? Schmaltz? I don't see any number one defenseman in their system grooming to be, playing in 3 years. They just don't have it right now. So it's going to be tough for this team, but we'll see what happens this year. Up next, we have the Colorado Avalanche, and wow, what a year this team had. They had one of the worst seasons in NHL history 2 seasons ago, and people are looking at them and saying McKinnon is a bust at number 1, Landeskog is too young to be captain, he has no idea what he's doing, Matt Duchene is ruining this team as a cancer in the locker room. Joe Sakic has no idea what he's doing as GM. Patrick Waugh is gone. He left as coach before the season started. What the hell is Bednar going to do as coach? I mean, team's in shambles. Tyson Barrie had a terrible season, and this team's looking like hell. Well, wouldn't you know that they would turn it around completely and make it into the playoffs and almost give Nashville a run for their money? They played really well against Nashville in the playoffs. They scored some big goals against Nashville, and I think their number 1 line actually played better than Nashville's number 1 line. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. The major transactions this year, there weren't many. They signed Ian Cole to a 3-year, $12.75 million contract, and they landed Philip Grubauer. Many people were wondering where Grubauer would end up, potential number 1 starter, and they acquired him just for a second-round pick. Some people might see that as a steal, but we'll see what happens. I'm not sure how this will play out. In the preseason, Colorado finished with a 3-3 record. Tyson Barrie led the team with 5 points. And some of the big questions we have are, can Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen repeat? They had an amazing year last year. That first line was stellar. All of them had over 60 points. MacKinnon and Rantanen almost had 100 points each. If MacKinnon wasn't injured for that 10-game stretch, I think he would have won the Hart. But it was really hard to take that away from Taylor Hall when he had 50 more points than the second player on his team. But if they can repeat again this year, point production-wise, I don't see this team having any issues making the playoffs again. The only issue, which is our second big question for the team, is who is going to score secondary scoring for this team? Because only one other forward on the team had over 40 points last year after the first line. So if you have a team that's that dominant, they're not going to make it far in the playoffs with only one line producing for them, because eventually the other team's going to catch on and say, okay, look, we need to shut down this line. Who wins the starting goalie position between Semyon Varlamov and Philip Grubauer? Varlamov's a great goaltender, but he's been injured a lot recently. I think Colorado fans have been frustrated with this, where it's not his fault, but he played a ton of games under Patrick Waugh. I think Patrick Waugh played him so much and ran him into the ground, and you really can't do that with a goalie. He should have been playing 60 to 65 games tops, and instead he was playing closer to 70 games a season. If he played great, team made the playoffs. If they didn't play the great, team missed the playoffs. You can't have to rely on a goalie the whole season like that. So they bring in Grubauer. Grubauer can play number 1 minutes. He proved that with the Capitals last season, but he ended up choking in the playoffs, and they put Holtby in, where you know the rest of the story. In my opinion, I think they'll switch off starters every other game until one of them finds a rhythm, and they're going to start playing whoever gets the most amount of consecutive wins. Once a goalie starts losing games, another goalie will come in, and the two of them are just going to battle each other. I see them splitting the season probably like 40 games apiece, 41 games apiece. Unless, of course, one of them just ends up playing a lot better. So we'll have to see what happens here, but I think Colorado has much better options in net this year than they have in recent years. Next, we have the Dallas Stars. Last year was an exciting year to start off, and then a major collapse towards the end made it a very forgettable season. Alex Radulov had his best season in the NHL, but the story of the season was Ben Bishop getting injured once again. The major transactions for the team, they re-signed Tyler Seguin to an 8-year, $78.8 million contract, which we spoke about in the last episode. Valerie Nichushkin comes back from the KHL to sign a 2-year, $5.9 million contract. And Anton Khudobin comes in to sign a 2-year, $5 million contract. In the preseason, Dallas played great. They went 4-2-1. Jamie Benn led the team with 5 points. Some of their biggest questions are, and this is going to be a theme for a lot of teams in the NHL, where is their secondary scoring? Again, this is a first-line team, first and foremost. Nobody outside of the first line had over 40 points last season. That's not good. So a lot of people will say, okay, the team didn't make the playoffs because of Ben Bishop's injury, and they had to rely on Lehtinen. But that's unfair. When you have a team like Dallas, their first line, Seguin has almost 80 points. Ben has almost 80 points. Radulov has almost 80 points. And then you look at their second line. This guy that is okay, I guess, has almost 40 points. Second liners really need to be in the 50-point range, getting close to 60 points if you want to have a deep playoff run. If you look at a team like Washington, Vegas, Winnipeg, Nashville, those are some balanced scoring teams. And this team does not have it. So when you're in the Central Division and you have to play against these teams who have the depth to move forward, if you're not getting the secondary scoring, you're going to lose more games than you win. But if you're not going to be scoring goals, you need to have solid goaltending. And with Ben Bishop's injury, that does hurt them. He's had injury problems in 3 of the last 4 years, and although Anton Khudobin had a great season for Boston last year as backup, I don't think you can rely on him to be a steady starter in case he gets injured again. Khudobin didn't play well for Boston the year before last, and when he was with Anaheim and Carolina, he didn't play well at all. So he had a stretch from 2013 to 2017 where he just wasn't that great. So you don't know which kind of Anton Khudobin you're going to get. I think Boston has better defense than Dallas, so it might be a little difficult for both of these goalies to maintain a high level of play. If you don't have secondary scoring, it's difficult. But they do have a new coach this year, so maybe he can develop a system where teams can play better defensively. They have more of a transition game. I think Dallas wants to be a transition team built on lots of speed and opportunity to get goals off of turnovers. Which leads into our next question, which is how well will Miro Heiskanen do? Is it Heiskanen or Heiskanen? I think it's Heiskanen, but we'll have to see what happens. So many announcers say the different thing. I'd like to see him come out and be like, hi, you might know me, you might have heard of me, but my name's actually Miro Heiskanen or Heiskanen, or we'll see what happens there. That's probably the biggest question of the year. How do you pronounce his last name? I don't know. We're going to say Heiskanen for now until we get corrected. But how good is he going to be? He has incredible hype. He was drafted 3rd overall, but I don't think he's going to be anywhere close to a Rasmus Dahlin type player. He's in his own category. Could he become a Noah Hannafin kind of player? Maybe. I see him becoming something of a Noah Hannafin kind of player, where you're young, great skating ability, a little bit of physicality, but he plays on the same side as John Klingberg, so I think that pipe dream of having Klingberg and Heiskanen play together isn't really going to happen yet, which could be a good thing. I think it's important to have both players on different lines so you can balance out that defensive unit. The only issue is he's playing with Mark Mathot. Mathot is used to playing with a more offensive-minded defenseman. He was Erik Karlsson's partner for years. Maybe this opens up Heiskanen's game. Maybe Klingberg can be a mentor for Heiskanen. I don't think you can look at him and say, oh, he's going to get like 60 points this year. No, I mean, Klingberg had 60 points last year, and he's a solid player in the NHL. I think realistic point production value, you might get 20 to 30 points out of him like McAvoy did last season. He's not going to be on the number 1 power play unit. That unit's going to have the first line, Klingberg, and Spezza, or someone like that. The future looks bright for Dallas with Heiskanen in it. The real question is, can the Stars acquire any potential second-line forwards? Their second line consists of Jason Spezza, Blake Como, and Janmark. That doesn't really scream to me second line. I really look at that and see a third line. It's going to be tough for them. If they don't have good scoring this season, Dallas is not going to be making the playoffs. St. Louis really produced a great offseason, and they're looking to get right back in. That's going to be a very competitive Western Conference, and I just don't see Dallas making it right now. Coming up next is the Minnesota Wild. Last season, the Minnesota Wild lost in the first round to the Winnipeg Jets in a pretty dominant fashion. Winnipeg looked like a monster last year, and many people thought they were going to win the Stanley Cup. Granlund and Stahl had stellar seasons for Minnesota, while one of the main stories was how Zach Parise was injured again and had health issues for most of the season, out for a very long time, and that really hurt their chances in the playoffs. This is an issue with Parise now. He's had major health issues since 2013-2014, where he hasn't really played a full consistent season. He plays a very gritty style of hockey. He's always giving 100%. He's always hitting. He's always getting into the tough areas. He's the guy you want in front of the crease, but he's getting older now, and his body's kind of feeling the effects of his play over the past decade. Only one major transaction for the Wild this season with the extension of Jason Zucker. He signed a 5-year, $27.5 million contract. He's a great player for the team, and I think the team really loves having him there, proving to be a secondary scorer and special teams player that's proved pivotal over the past few years for the team's success. This preseason, they went 2-4-1, with Jason Zucker leading the team with 5 points. Some of the biggest questions are going to be, can Zach Parise stay healthy? We mentioned earlier he's been injured. His style of play is very tough. How does that translate to this season? If he's not healthy this year, then I just don't see this team making it past the first round of the playoffs. I do see them as a playoff team. They're very deep, but it's tough to say. They've been stuck in this block for the past 5 years where they can't make it past the first or second round of the playoffs. They're consistently good. They have very balanced scoring. They have several players who are getting above 40, 50 points a season. They have great special teams. They have great goaltending with Dubnyk. But when I look in the Central Division, I just don't see them as a better team than Winnipeg or Nashville. The only way they're going to beat those teams is if Dubnyk sits there and he goes, oh, you know what, I'm going to be a superstar right now, and just completely shut them out. And what ended up happening last year when they did play Winnipeg was Dubnyk did play really well, and the team just had nothing. They could not compete. Winnipeg is 4 lines deep, and Minnesota doesn't have that right now. I don't think they're an elite team. They're kind of stuck in no man's land right now where they're too good to do a rebuild. They have a lot of young talent and veteran players, but they're not elite talent. So unless there's some kind of intangible thing going on with the team, I don't see them becoming a powerhouse team in the Western Conference. The Nashville Predators are next. Last season was amazing for them. They're President's Trophy winners, but they lost in the second round of the playoffs to Winnipeg in one of the most frustrating Clash of the Titans series I've ever seen in my life. Both teams were first and second in the NHL, and they had to meet in the second round of the playoffs. That's a debate in and of itself that could last several podcasts, but we'll stop talking about the playoff structure for right now. Pekka Rinne finally won a Vezina Trophy. Some of the major transactions for the team were they re-signed UC Saros to a 3-year, $4.5 million contract. This is great for them. He's going to be the future of goaltending for the team once Rinne's out. I think he's very underestimated. When he comes in, he really shuts down other teams, so look forward to a big future from him. They also re-signed Ryan Hartman to a 1-year, $875,000 contract, which is interesting because it's less than $1 million. It could be a steal. He played well for them, but they traded a first-round pick for him last year. So you basically gave up a first-round draft pick to sign a guy for less than $1 million. I don't really like that trade. I think you could have gotten away with maybe a second or a third instead, but it was at the deadline. I think GMs knew that Nashville was kind of looking to solidify their place in the NHL and potentially win a cup during this huge window they have right now, and they took advantage of David Poile. So it's good that they have Hartman, but I think they kind of wasted that first-round pick on him. This preseason, they finished with a 3-3 record. Philip Forsberg had 9 points in 4 games. So if that's any indicator of how the season's going to go, look forward to Forsberg getting 200 points and breaking Gretzky's record. No, I'm just kidding, but look forward to Philip Forsberg having a great season. I think that playoff loss last season really kind of bit him and the rest of the young core of this team. Their defense is incredible, so I really think this team's going to play great again this year, and they're definitely cup contenders. Some of the big questions for them is this their last year or last window at being the best team in the NHL and being potential cup favorites? That's a tough question to answer. I think Pekka Rinne is getting up there in age, but if you look at their defensive core is very young. Their offense is very young. Their special teams is great. They all love Peter Laviolette as coach. Their fans love him. I don't think their window's even close to closing. I think they have a good 5 years left to becoming a Stanley Cup champion. But with Pekka Rinne's age, you might kind of look and say, okay, how long does he have? So I think when people think of the Stanley Cup window for the Predators, it's how long can Pekka Rinne be a superstar goalie in the league? And he struggled last year in the playoffs. There were some games against Winnipeg where Nashville utterly dominated Winnipeg. I think game 1 they outshot them almost 50-20, and Winnipeg just scored a few goals on Rinne, and that was it. Is he a playoff goaltender? I don't know. I really don't know. But he's really the window people are talking about if they can win a cup. So the real question is, can they beat Winnipeg in the playoffs? I think for the considerable future, the next 2-3 years, whoever represents the Central Division in the Western Conference Final is either going to be Winnipeg or Nashville. I think St. Louis is the only other team that comes close to beating them, but it's really just Nashville or Winnipeg right now for the next 2 to 3 years. If Rinne can have a solid playoffs, Nashville will win that series, But he really needs to prove himself to be a good playoff goaltender because he choked against Pittsburgh 2 years ago badly, and he really, really choked against Winnipeg. And honestly, he didn't play well against Colorado either. Colorado got to him. I think Colorado had a chance to beat Nashville if they kept playing that way. So, I know, call me far-fetched. I'm a huge Predators fan, so don't take this as a bashing, but I think many people would agree in saying that he's kind of the weak spot at the moment, and they're unsure of what's happening. Up next, we have the St. Louis Blues. Last season, they started off hot, and wow, they had an utter collapse to miss the playoffs in a very lackluster final game versus the Colorado Avalanche. Talk about a scripted season. The season comes down to one game. Scheduled. It was actually Colorado versus St. Louis. Whoever wins this game goes to the playoffs. And St. Louis looked terrible. They didn't even want to go to the playoffs. I've never seen a team just be like, you know what? Yeah, and I know we just played all season long to make the playoffs, but I don't really want to go there. And they didn't do it, and they got crushed. I couldn't believe it. That was so disappointing to watch. I was so happy for Colorado, but I was so disappointed in St. Louis at the same time. That was a season to forget. And I think Jake Allen feels the brunt of that. I don't think he wants to remember last season at all. He's either great or terrible, and that's going to be a huge question mark for this team moving forward. Braden Shen was a highlight last year. He had his best season as a professional and really looked like the number one center for the team. But that changed this offseason with some of the major transactions, and they have a lot. They signed Chad Johnson to a one-year, $1.75 million contract as their backup goalie after they lost Carter Hutton. But then they signed Tyler Bozak for 3 years, $15 million as their next center. Then they signed David Perron, who had a great year for Vegas last year. He's played in St. Louis before. He's comfortable there. They then bring in Patrick Maroon for a one-year, $1.75 million contract. He kind of fits the Blues' personality. Tough, emotional, gets you those dirty goals. Going to be a great addition to this team. They re-signed Joel Edmondson to a one-year, $3 million extension. And then they make a blockbuster trade, trading Zabotka, Berglund, and Thompson, a 2019 first and a 2021 second to Buffalo for Ryan O'Reilly. That is a bit of an overpayment, but Ryan O'Reilly is a great player. He's a number one center. He barely takes penalties. He penalty kills. He's on the power play. He wins more faceoffs than anyone in the league. He's definitely their number one center now. He's an oddly elite number one center. I would say he's elite, but I don't see him getting over 100 points a season. But now he's playing with Tarasenko, so maybe he does, you know. I don't think he's a 100-point player, but I do see him as a star. This preseason, they went 4-3-0, with Sammy Blais leading the team with 5 points. And some of the big questions for this team: is St. Louis magically a cup contender? I'm going to say yes, but only if Jake Allen is sharp. Look at their center depth. They have Ryan O'Reilly, Braden Shen, and Tyler Bozak as their number 1, 2, and 3 centers. There was a point where Toronto's number 1 center was Tyler Bozak. I mean, he's their number 3. Their top 3 lines look incredible, and their top 4 defense looks incredible. They're very deep. If Jake Allen can say, okay, you know what, I'm going to put together a good season, people support him, then, and he doesn't, I think he needs to be tougher mentally. I don't think he needs to look for support. I think he needs to be this goalie that says, you know what, I'm the best goalie in the NHL. I think the best goalies in the league's history have been cocky. Look at Patrick Waugh and Martin Brodeur and Dominik Hasek. They all looked at everyone else and had this look in their eyes that said, you know what, I'm the best. None of you were even close to being as good as me, and I'm going to prove it. He doesn't have that mentality, and I think that hurts the Blues team. So I think on paper, they are a cup contender. In real life, I don't think they're a cup contender. What can we expect from Kyrou? He's playing on the second line with Braden Shen and Jaden Schwartz. I'd hope for 20 goals. I hope he can stay on that line. It's tough for a rookie to come in and stay on that second line. You rarely see players do it. It's tough to make that transition to the NHL. I think there's a lot of talent on the Blues roster that should make it easier for him, but they're also going to be expecting him to play at the level that they're playing so they can be on the same page and develop chemistry. He had a great preseason, and a lot of fans are hopeful that he can be the player that Robbie Fabry has not yet become. Fabry's always injured. He has the talent. We talked about this earlier, but maybe Kyrou can be that player that fans were expecting from Fabry, which kind of hurts Fabry a little bit, but who knows. Wrapping up the Central Division is the Winnipeg Jets. Last season was their best season in franchise history as they almost won the President's Trophy in a tight battle with the Nashville Predators, but they ended up getting the upper hand on the Predators, beating them in the second round of the playoffs, ultimately losing to Vegas in the conference finals. If I'm honest with you, I think Winnipeg actually played better than Vegas in the conference finals, and if they meet them again, who knows what happens. I think Vegas got better as well, but they could be a different script. Connor Hellebuck had a great season, along with Patrick Laine, Blake Wheeler, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Nikolai Ehlers. Major transactions for the team. Josh Morrissey signs a 2-year extension for $6.3 million. Blake Wheeler signs a 5-year extension for $41.25 million. Jacob Trouba resigns for 1 year, $5 million. Adam Lowry resigns for 3 years, $8.75 million. And Connor Hellebuck cashes in on his Vezina candidacy with 6 years, $37 million. In the preseason, they were 4-3, with Blake Wheeler leading the team with 7 points. Some of their biggest questions: is this their best chance to win a cup? We talked about Nashville having a Stanley Cup window, but really it was the Pekka Rinne window. I think Winnipeg has the real Stanley Cup window coming to a close, only because they have to re-sign Patrick Laine, Jacob Trouba, Kyle Connor, and Tyler Myers, who are all in the last years of their contract, and they only have $5 million in cap space. Someone's going to have to go here. I don't think that any of them are going to take huge pay cuts. I think this is probably Jacob Trouba's last chance to make a name for himself here in Winnipeg. He's a bit of a drama queen. He only signed for 1 year again, so it looks like he's just contentious upon playing there. I don't see him being here long, and honestly, he could end up being traded at the deadline to clear up cap space. With his $5 million gone, that opens up a little bit of money to sign Laine, but Kyle Connor also had a great season. Someone's going to have to go. They're either going to keep everybody for one final gamble to win the cup this year, and then regardless of how well they do, next year they're going to be a little bit worse, in my opinion. That being said, this season, can Patrick Laine finally lead the league in goals? He almost beat Ovechkin this year for the Richard Trophy, but he quieted off a little bit towards the end. I think he has the talent. I think everyone knows he has the talent, to be honest with you. This could be his year to get 50. Will Connor Hellebuck win the Vezina this year? He has a strong chance. Right now, Winnipeg has one of the deepest teams in the NHL, and he's a great goaltender. And I think he's going to come out there and say, you know what? I'm going to prove to them that this contract was worth it. I'm going to play hard. I'm going to do my best, and we're going to try to win this thing. I say he has a great chance along with Vasilevsky to win the Vezina. Is this Paul Maurice's last year as coach of this team? He struggled for a bit until last season. People were saying they have a great roster. Why are they not performing well? If they take that gamble this year on trying to win before they have to make a bunch of moves to clear space for their star talent, and they don't win, Maurice might be gone. You need to deliver on a gamble like that because the GM doesn't want to look stupid. He doesn't want to tell the owner, you know what, I think we're going to win this, and then just stop. So that's their biggest question. What happens with the team moving forward? Is Maurice going to be there, and can they keep these young guys? So let's pick up and move to the Eastern Conference and start with the Atlantic Division, which is probably the toughest division in the Eastern Conference now. Let's start with the Boston Bruins. Last season, they had a very surprising season to nearly win the President's Trophy after many people picked them to miss the playoffs. They did end up losing to Tampa Bay in the second round of the playoffs due to an injury to Torrey Krug and the fact that Tampa Bay is a very stacked team, so it's going to be hard to beat them. But it was pretty convincing, so it kind of showed some flaws in the Bruins team, that they were kind of reliant on one line. Rask returned to form with huge months from December to March, barely losing a single game for a 30-game stretch that propelled them to the top of the NHL standings for a while. Pastrnak, Bergeron, and Marchand formed arguably the best line in hockey. I don't think anyone played better than them. A lot of people will say Rantanen, McKinnon, and Landeskog were better. Some people will say that Ben, Sagan, and Radulov was better. But really, I just don't see anyone being a better line. Or Carlson, Marchessault, and Smith being better. But I just don't see any of them being a better line than Bergeron, Pastrnak, and Marchand. They completely dominated the NHL. They had the best 5-on-5 stats. They were amazing on the power play. Bergeron and Marchand are hands down the best penalty-killing pair of forwards in the NHL. And there was absolutely no chance of anyone being better than them. The main storyline was how well their rookies played. Danton Heinen, Jake DeBrusk, Charlie McAvoy all played great. Matt Grzelcyk played great. So they really propelled this team to a high elite status that many people were not expecting. For transactions, John Moore was signed to a 5-year, $13.75 million contract, and Yaroslav Halak was brought in to back up Tuukka Rask for 2 years, $5.5 million. This preseason, they went 5-1-2. Oddly enough, Lee Stempniak led the team with 6 points and was not signed because this team is stacked with young talent. He's currently unsigned after leading the team in points. That's kind of interesting. I've never really seen anything like that. The biggest questions for this team immediately was last year a fluke? You saw them completely expose other teams, and the first line carried them heavily. But Tampa Bay really got to them. I think John Cooper sat there and said, okay, if we can shut down Bergeron's line, I think we can utterly crush this team. And they did. Even in the game one, when the Bruins crushed the Tampa Bay Lightning on the scoreboard, on the stat sheet, Tampa Bay controlled 5-on-5 play, had a better power play, had better penalty killing, and their goaltending was better. I think Tampa Bay really exposed this team. I think they're going to have to work hard to prove this year that it wasn't a fluke last year and that they can keep playing at this level. They got crushed by Washington in Game 1 of the season so far, but they just rebounded tonight with a 4-0 win over the Sabres. I don't know which team we're going to get. I'm thinking more of the Sabres team, to be honest, but we'll see how it goes. How does this team do after losing Riley Nash, Rick Nash, and Tim Schaller? Well, they're going to be putting Ryan Donato on the second line. Donato has some talent. In 12 games last year, he had 9 points. Many people were expecting him to be a dark horse for Rookie of the Year candidate, and it's going to be exciting to watch him play. On the third line, they're hoping that Sean Corrali can step up from playing on the fourth line and hopefully step in and play center on that third line between David Backes and Danton Heinen. Another question is, how well is Anders Bjork going to do? He has a lot of talent. He played on the first line last year with Bergeron and Marchand before getting injured. He had a great preseason, even though he only played 1 game, but he looked well. He played a good game against Buffalo tonight, so it could be an interesting year for him. He's going to be on that third line, and it's going to be a very dynamic third line with him on it. There are 2 main questions for the team this year. The first question is there a trade on the horizon with their defensemen? They have 7 starting defensemen in their lineup, and then they have Urho Vakanainen in Providence. Vakanainen looked amazing this preseason. Many people thought he was their best player. A lot of fans were disappointed with Torrey Krug because although he's amazing in the transition game, and he's a great power play specialist, he's not stellar defensively due to his size. People don't really see him as a number 2, number 1 defenseman. And I tend to agree with that. I don't think he's cut to be a number 1 defenseman in the NHL, and that's not saying he's not skilled enough. It's just because of his size and the way today's game is. I think Vakanainen is going to be that eventual replacement for Zdeno Chara. The issue is they signed John Moore, who's like a worse version of Torrey Krug, good transition game, jumps in on the offense. He's not huge. They have Matt Grzelcyk, who's a worse version of John Moore. So they basically have three guys who are these short defensemen that basically play this up-tempo offensive transition line game. I think Krug is the best one out of the three by far. I don't want the team to get rid of Krug. He is such a good power play quarterback, and he is such a good puck mover that this team can't afford to lose him. I think Boston Bruins fans get frustrated easily, and they just point the finger at Krug and say, "Oh, get rid of him, he gets injured." He never gets injured. This is the first time he's been injured. He's played an average of 78 games a season for his entire career in Boston. So I don't get where this injury talk is coming from. I think fans are being a little overzealous here, and that's not fair to him. He's worked his butt off to become a player for this team. The team loves him. He's huge in the locker room. He's alternate captain material. Even if he's not wearing the A, he's a voice in the locker room. He's a voice back on the defensive end, and the team loves him. He's not going anywhere, folks. I think if you had to move someone, it would be Moore, even though they just signed him. I don't like the signing, to be honest, but it would be Moore and Grzelcyk, and you bring up Vakanainen. If Chara retires, then you might have a situation where Vakanainen comes up, Krug's still the number 2 pairing with Carlo, and then you have either Grzelcyk or Moore on the third pair with Miller. The second big question is what's going to happen with David Krejci and David Backes this season. A lot of fans have been looking at David Krejci's contract and saying, why is he the most highly paid player on the Bruins? Let's get rid of him. He's terrible. He's just terrible. He is not terrible. I don't think people understand how talented David Krejci is. This guy can completely slow the game down and do things that a handful of players could dream of doing in the NHL, which is make these crazy outlet passes, these very nifty moves. He opens up space for other players without doing anything. He's a brilliant player. He's been injured a little bit in the past few seasons, but before that, he never got injured. I think people look at him, and they look at Bergeron, and it looks like Bergeron's putting in more effort than Krejci. But you can't compare every player to Bergeron. Bergeron's an elite talent and the best player on the Bruins. That's unfair to Krejci. Krejci is a great player. When he's in the lineup and he's on the second line, making sure that, they have a balanced depth scoring, and he's on the power play, this team does well. So you really can't get rid of him. And now his contract doesn't look as bad with the salary cap moving up each year. The player I do think has a chance of getting moved is David Backes. It's tough because if you sign David Backes to like $4 million a year, it would look a lot better. But right now he's making $6 million. And when you have someone making $6 million a year, there's this perception in your mind that says, okay, this guy's going to get 25 to 30 goals a season, maybe 50 plus points. He's going to be a great penalty killer. He's going to be on the power play, get some contributions there. But last year he struggled with huge injury issues. The year before that, he was struggling to find a place on the team. He did not have any chemistry with David Krejci whatsoever, and he wasn't playing center. I don't like how they put him at wing. I think in this year's NHL, or not this year, but this generation of NHL, your wingers should be unbelievably fast and nifty, and your center has the potential to become maybe one of the slower players that slows down the pace of the game. They play more defense. Backes is a great two-way center, great defensively, he's strong, and he has offensive upside. I think they need to keep him at number 3 center, and you put Corrali and Heinen as his wingers, or Bjork. That's the only way he's going to find success on this team. He's not a winger. They need to stop that experiment. It's 3 years too late. Put him back at center. Up next, we have the Buffalo Sabres. Last season was a disaster. Jack Eichel suffered an injury at the beginning of the year, and they just dropped at the beginning of the season and never recovered. When Eichel did come back, he had an amazing season. He almost got 30 goals. He was averaging a point per game, and I think this year you're going to see him really thrive and get over a point per game. He became captain. He's a voice on the team. He has a lot of passion for the game, and I think Buffalo Sabres fans should be very excited about him. They finally get the first round pick where they draft you-know-who, Rasmus Dahlin. That's amazing. Dahlin and Eichel as your center defensive combo is a key to success. They're your core now. If they can get a goalie who's also a budding superstar, this team's going to be one to look out for very soon. One of the things I'm happy about with this team is their major transactions this past season, where they signed Sam Reinhart to a 2-year, $7.3 million contract, Carter Hutton to a 3-year, $8.25 million contract. They make a big trade in acquiring Jeff Skinner for a handful of picks. They make an even bigger trade, trading away Ryan O'Reilly for Vladimir Sabaka, Patrick Berglund, Tage Thompson, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. That's amazing. They completely fleeced St. Louis there. That's a great trade. Then they made a trade with the Penguins for a fourth-round pick in acquiring Connor Sherry and Matt Hunwick. Matt Hunwick's a throwaway right now. I don't know. I think they just bury his contract. But Connor Sherry has a lot to offer for this team. In the preseason, they went 3-4. Jack Eichel led the team with 4 points. Who is this team? Last year, when you looked at their depth, they looked terrible. They're a complete AHL team. They could not compete. It's either aging veterans or AHL talent. They had nobody. This year, they look completely different. The players I mentioned earlier, they brought in almost 2.5 lines of players. Jeff Skinner's going to look to rebound. He's a 30-goal scorer. Skinner and Eichel on the same line? Wow, that's going to be great. Vladimir Sobotka's going to handle their defense a little bit better. Berglund is a good defensive player as well. We'll see what happens with Tage Thompson. Connor Sherry has experience playing with Pittsburgh for 2 championship teams. He's got the responsibility, he's got the effort, and he knows how to play at a championship level. That's great for this team to have in their locker room after not doing well for the entire tenure, or basically since Ryan Miller was goalie for the team. Some of their other questions: is Rasmus Dahlin going to be a superstar immediately? I'm going to say no. I think it's tougher for a defenseman to have that impact in the NHL. I watched him tonight versus the Bruins. He looked great. He's a great puck mover, great hits. He's very smart. I don't think he's going to go out there and put up Erik Karlsson numbers right away, but I think you can expect him to get 40-plus points this year and be a very key contributor to this team as they look forward to moving their rebuild along. Casey Middlestat is another kind of hidden player on the team, even though everyone's looking at him to be a superstar, or not a superstar, but a star at some point. I don't know if he becomes a star this season either, but the way he's been developing, that's a lot of promise for Buffalo fans to be looking forward to. I think this team's going to be looking great in a couple of years. If they can find a number one goalie, that'll be excellent. Can Carter Hutton be that number one goalie? I'm going to say no. He's a little older. Unless he has a Tim Thomas effect, then maybe. But I think he's going to be their number one for a couple of years. I think they draft and develop another goalie in the farm system while the rest of their core is developing. And watch out. I mean, this team is going to be stacked. Coming up next is the most confusing team in the NHL, in my opinion, the Detroit Red Wings. Last season, they were horrible. But they did draft Philip Zadina in a miracle of events that occurred during the draft where many teams overlooked him. I think that's a complete steal for the Red Wings, and that whole last season debacle is completely worth it because they got Zadina. I got to be honest, their fans should be very excited by this. Anthony Mantha also had a really good season last year, and it's taken a little bit of time for him to develop. He was a 2013 draft pick, and it's been 5 years now, but some players take a little bit longer to develop. I'd be excited for this player. Their transactions this offseason are why I'm pretty confused. They re-signed Mike Green to 2 years, $5.375 million. They signed Thomas Vanek for 1 year, $3 million. Jonathan Bernier, 3 years, $9 million. They re-signed Andreas Athanasiou for 2 years, $6 million. They re-signed Anthony Mantha to 2 years, $6.6 million, and Dylan Larkin finally cashed in with 5 years, $30.5 million. This preseason, they went 7-1, with Nyquist leading the way at 7 points. But it's just preseason. The biggest question, really, is what is Ken Holland doing to this team? This team was hockey royalty from the 1990s until, let's say, 2015, maybe 2013, really, in all honesty. And I just don't get it. His signings over the past couple of years do not make any sense at all. I don't know if there was something going on where he's like, oh, Zetterberg's still here. We're going to try to get something going. No, you have to give yourself an honest look in the mirror. Your defensive core is terrible. You don't have a single number one defensive prospect in your farm system. Not a single one. Many people thought they were going to get one this draft with either Bouchard or Hughes. But when you have Zadina dropping down like that, you have to take him. So now they have their offensive talent coming in. They have Larkin, they have Athanasiou, they have Nyquist, they have Mantha, they have Zadina. They have enough for 2 solid scoring lines in the future. Not right now, but in the future, definitely. But you look at their defense, and it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. So they're going to either need to draft someone this season. I don't think they're going to have a good season. They either need to draft someone in this offseason, make a big trade with some of their younger talented forwards, or hope to make a big splash in the free agent market at some point. Clearly, Ken Holland's kind of lost touch with this team. And with that being said, Steve Yzerman makes his way out of the GM position in Tampa Bay. Is there something forming here? I think everyone's kind of wondering this. If Yzerman comes back to Detroit, you know he's going to get stuff done. He's honest. He looks at the team and he's going to say, I think we need a defender. In fact, I think we need 4 defenders because this team has nothing going on. And during that time, they need another goalie. I don't think Bernier's a number 1 goalie. I think Howard's old. Mrazek was a failure. I just don't see this team really competing in the next 5 years, and that's disappointing for a team that was hockey royalty for almost 30 years. Something that you might see is Blashill being fired. I don't think he has the tools with him right now to get Detroit even remotely close to the playoffs. So you can't look at him and be like, oh, he didn't make the playoffs as a coach, or when he did, they were eliminated in the first round. That's unfair because he has no talent on the team with him. And I think Mike Babcock saw this, and that's why he left, to be honest with you. You look at Toronto, and you know they're going to have a lot of talent. But, I mean, Detroit has nothing. Blashill might be in a position right now where they get enough of a rebuild going, and then they just kind of stop, and then he's just fired. So he's either going to get fired during the rebuild or fired before the rebuild, and they'll bring a new coach in to kind of say, hey, this is the way we're going to be playing. We need to develop talent, but for right now, this is how we're going to play, and I expect wins out of you, and I expect effort. So it might take a little bit of growing pains, but this team definitely has the offensive depth to move forward with the rebuild. Defensively and goaltending-wise, nope. Up next, we have the Florida Panthers. And they're an interesting team. They had a terrible first half of the season last year, and they had just gotten over the Gerard Gallant firing. So with that, they struggled in the beginning of the year. Boutner was having a tough time as head coach. They weren't getting wins. They weren't scoring. Their defense wasn't playing well. And it looked like they were just going to be a complete abomination until the All-Star break. The All-Star break. Barkov emerges as a premier two-way forward in the NHL. Many people thought he'd be nominated for the Selke this year. Dadonov had a strong second half. And Boutner finally settles in as coach and says, look, this is the way we're going to play. Let's do it. And they ended up having a very good second half season. In fact, they had the best record in the second half of the NHL season, narrowly missing the playoffs in the Eastern Conference after being a complete shoe out to miss the playoffs. They didn't really have many major transactions this offseason. They signed Alexander Petrovic to a 1-year, $2 million contract, and they acquired Mike Hoffman for a series of draft picks. This preseason, they went 3-4, with Bugstag leading the way with 4 points. Biggest questions, can they make the playoffs? Based off of the way they finished last season, I say yes. I think you'll see 4 teams from the Atlantic and 4 teams from the Metropolitan Division make the playoffs this year, and one of those teams is going to be the Florida Panthers, if they can keep this up. The only way they can do that is if Luongo stays healthy, and if Hoffman's not a distraction, and all of their star players can be their star players. This team's young. They have a lot of young talent that's around 25 years of age. I worry about the Mike Hoffman situation because Erik Karlsson is hockey royalty, and when your girlfriend is making comments like that about someone's unborn child, especially a hockey royalty unborn child, that kind of raises questions. Is Hoffman a cancer in the locker room? Nobody knows this. But are any of those players friends with anyone on the Ottawa Senators? They're going to ask. They're not going to be looking in the news and saying, oh, maybe he sucks, maybe he doesn't. No, they're going to be looking and being like, is it just his girlfriend? Was it him that was giving these opinions to his girlfriend? What's going on here? And they're probably worried about this. Hoffman himself is a great player. He has a blistering shot. He's fast, and he knows how to play with pace. If he turns out to not be a cancer in the locker room, and he's a strong player for the team, this team is going to make the playoffs. He's going to increase their power play chances, and he's going to increase their offense. They're going to have a much more balanced attack, and I just don't see them not making the playoffs. Another question will be, is this Aaron Ekblad's season? A lot of people are looking at him to make that step this year. Last year he had injury issues. This could be his year to say, look, I'm a Norris Trophy candidate. Great defensively, great offensively. He really thrived last season in the second half. And I think Florida Panthers fans are looking at him and saying, look, you're the guy now. We can't wait to see you. Everyone's excited for this kid. So this could be his year to take that step and at least gain some Norris Trophy recognition. Does he become a candidate? It's going to be tough to edge out Burns, Karlsson, Doughty, Hedman. So if he can get some top 10 votes, that'd be a huge season for him. And then last but not least is Barkov going to be recognized for the Selke on top of the Lady Byng this year? I really thought he'd be considered for the Selke Trophy this year, especially with Bergeron's injury. I think Bergeron still is the best defensive forward in the NHL by a mile, but he was injured for a while last season. He only played 60 games, so Barkov played more games. I think you kind of give him the nod there, if I'm being honest with you. And I am a Bruins fan, so it's tough for me to say that, but I'm going to be unbiased here. He had a great season. So look forward to Barkov this season making a bigger name for himself in a smaller market as a premier two-way forward in the NHL. Last season, you could say there were 2 dumpster fires among teams in the NHL. One of them is the Montreal Canadiens, and the other one's the Ottawa Senators. The biggest fire is probably the Senators, but we're going to be reviewing these teams back-to-back, so let's start off with the Montreal Canadiens. Last season, as I noted, was another disaster. Price and Weber were injured, Price is looking to rebound after his severely injured season the year before that. He comes back, has a sub-900 save percentage when he does return. His worst season in his career. That is tough when Price is consistently noted as the best goaltender in the world. That was tough for him. He had a lot of scrutiny. He had to constantly look in the mirror and say, oh my God, this again. And if you look at the defense in front of him, he wasn't getting any help. The team was terrible. Weber being injured didn't help. He had nothing to work with. On top of that, the treatment of Max Pacioretty was shameful. He's your captain. I'm going to sound like Terrell Owens here crying about Tony Romo saying, that's my quarterback. But that's your captain. You're the Montreal Canadiens. You're a dynasty elite team in the NHL. You're hockey royalty. You're sports royalty. You're the most historic team in hockey. And you're looking at your captain and saying, you know what, he sucks. Yeah, get him out of here. Let's be honest here. Julian wasn't giving Alex Galchenyuk a shot to play center. Who was Max Pacioretty's center? Drouin's a winger. Stop this experiment with Jonathan Drouin playing center. He is a winger. He is an elite winger when he plays on his game, and no one's getting the chance to see this. Let him play wing. You have Pacioretty basically alone. Pacioretty's never been like that dynamic talent that's going to deke everybody out and score. But Pacioretty is that talent who gets in the right place at the right time, scores the dirty goals, scores the elite sniper shot goals when he has open space. Great on the power play, 30-goal scorer. Last year, wasn't given that shot. Very disappointing. Their major transactions last year, they trade Alex Galchenyuk for Max Domi in a 1-for-1 trade. That is terrible. Galchenyuk is a proven 30-goal scorer in the NHL, and you're trading him for Domi, who has not scored above 20 goals in the NHL. You were really banking on the fact that Domi's going to have a resurgence here, and I just don't see him outperforming Galchenyuk in his career. Prove me wrong, but I think that's a bad move. They also traded Pacioretty finally, after which we reviewed in the last podcast episode, for Tatar, Suzuki, and a second-round pick. They re-signed Thomas Plekanec for a 1-year, $2.25 million. They re-signed Philip Danault, 3 years, $9.25 million. And they re-signed Paul Byron for 4 years, $13.6 million. This preseason, they went 4-3. Gallagher led the way with 5 points. Their biggest questions, how's Kotkaniemi going to play? When people saw him get drafted, there was an infamous meme that happened immediately where the fans just started crying because they didn't get Philip Zadina. And I had the same reaction. I thought it was a terrible move, but Kotkaniemi had a strong preseason. Apparently, he played excellent in his two-way game. Now, what does Claude Julien love? Two-way centers. If you look at him with Krejci and Bergeron, oh man, he loved them, and he loved Bergeron. I don't think anyone would ever not love Bergeron, but still, Kotkaniemi played very well, and he made his way onto the team. And I think Julien had to do this. I think it's kind of hard to force a player like that to play in the NHL at such a young age, but Julien's constantly scrutinized for hating on young talent. So this is really his chance to redeem himself and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to give this kid a shot. Why not? The season might be a tank in the first place with Weber already injured, so let's do it. Does Price rebound? I watched the game last night versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Price played great. So I don't know if this hurts their rebuild. If Price has a rebound, that's good and bad because they're going to be more competitive. I think fans want to see the team win, but is that going to hurt their draft chances? This is going to be another deep draft. They need defensive players. They need number ones. I think Kotkaniemi could be their number one center, but they do need another center. I don't think Suzuki's going to play next year. Maybe he does, but we'll see how it goes. He's already back in the AHL, so I still think they need center depth, and I still think they need tons of defensive help because I barely recognize a single name on that defensive unit. Petrie's their number one defender. That's not good. Weber's aging. They don't have someone who's going to replace them. This team has always had a number one defender who has garnered attention from the rest of the NHL. And when I look at this roster, PK Subban was going to be that defender, but they don't have that anymore. Bergevin messed that up. I think Bergevin's on the hot seat. I don't know what this loyalty is that the Molsons have to him, but I don't think he's proven to be a great general manager. I really don't. So we'll have to see what happens here. Nobody knows how long Weber's out for. He was just named captain of the team. I think he's a great leader, but without him being there, he comes back. How well is he going to play when he comes back? Is it going to take a while for him to get that rust off? Does anyone replace Max Pacioretty's scoring? I know people will say, oh, he only had 18 goals last year, duh. But before that, consistently getting 30, almost 40 goals a season. Who's replacing that? Max Domi's not going to replace that. If you don't have Drouin at wing, Drouin's not going to replace that. Galchenyuk's not going to replace that. He's not there anymore. You're looking at Brendan Gallagher to be that number one scoring winger. I don't see it. I think they're going to struggle offensively this year. They might have some balanced scoring where a lot of players get 10 to 15 goals, and that could save them with Julian's system. But I don't see anyone breaking 30 this year for them, and that's going to hurt, especially on the power play. Can Max Domi recover his career? We kind of looked at this in the last podcast, but I think he can. I think the kid has a lot of passion for the game, and if he applies himself correctly, especially in Julian's system, Julian loves gritty forwards. Max Domi is a gritty forward with upside, a lot of talent. If he can get this dirty snarl out of his system, and he can play more on the edge but not as vicious, I think they're looking at him and being like, he could be the next Brad Marchand, but I don't think so. I think Marchand has more upside, obviously. I mean, he's put up superstar numbers. That's a big question for them. So up next is hands down the biggest dumpster fire in the NHL, and I'm going to try to do some Ottawa Senators fans some justice here. This has to be the biggest disaster in recent memory for any sports franchise. I got to be honest with you. They lose their superstar, going to be Hall of Famer defenseman in Erik Karlsson, and they trade him for Josh Norris, Chris Tierney, Rudolph Balcers, Dylan DeMello, and a handful of picks. Who the hell are they? Like, you're not getting any stars back for this. It's not like you're trading him to San Jose for Brent Burns. Like, I think fans would have been like, oh, we got Brent Burns, that's awesome. But you still would have lost that trade because Burns is older than Karlsson, and Karlsson's just better. If you want to see how good Karlsson is, look at his playoffs in 2017, where he completely controlled every single series. He just proved hands down that he was a superstar in that series, and he already had won 2 Norris trophies before that, and they trade him for nothing. And do you know why they traded him for nothing? Because of Pierre Dorion. Pierre Dorion I'm not even going to go over their preseason or anything like that. It's not worth it right now. Pierre Dorion I was going to say, for biggest questions, is Pierre Dorion the worst GM in hockey? No, that's not even a question. I'm going to make it a statement. I think Pierre Dorion is hands down the worst GM in hockey. You had the situation with Erik Karlsson and Mike Hoffman. And when you looked at the last game of the season, Erik Karlsson skates up to the net, picks up the puck, waves to the fans, and he leaves. Do you know what that means? He's gone. So you have Pierre Dorion going to the news outlets and saying, oh, we're trying to sign him, he just doesn't want to sign. And you're wondering, like, what's going on? And then the story breaks with Hoffman's girlfriend saying all these things about Karlsson and his wife. And then it turns out that Karlsson and his wife brought this to Ottawa Senators management staff, and they did nothing about it. And it only went public because they went and did nothing about it. So that's terrible. You treated your franchise player like trash, like he didn't matter. What's the plan there? Why would you do that? This guy has no clue on how to talk to people. He might be a good businessman, maybe on paper, but like, if you can't handle something like that, that's such common sense. If you have a player like Karlsson go to you and be like, hey, this happened, it's pretty terrible, like, we had a miscarriage, but then his girlfriend was saying that she hopes we have a miscarriage. Instantly, you investigate it, you suspend Hoffman, and then you trade Hoffman, and you say, Karlsson, we have your back. completely. You are the heart and soul of this team. You're our captain. You're our best player in the franchise's history. And we're going to keep you. You know, you're really important to us. The fans love you. You're the only reason why people go to games. And he handled it in the complete opposite way you'd want to, which is, oh, I'm going to ignore this and just do nothing about it, and hopefully it goes away. How inept are you? That's a complete failure. One of the issues I have with Dorion is at the draft. I don't know if any of you saw this. If you go back and look at highlight footage of the NHL draft this offseason, you can see him sitting at a table with Eugene Melnyk, and he's sitting there smiling and giggling, and it's like, oh, I'm part of the old man's club now. Like he's always wanted this. He's just sitting there like he's all happy. He has this stupid smirk on his face, and he just is so excited to be there. I don't know why you're excited. You're losing your best player, and you know it. I don't... Are you that insecure that you've wanted to get to this point your whole life by being a complete brown-nosing suck-up with no spine? He should not be the general manager of this team. And the only reason he is general manager of this team is because Eugene Melnyk is the worst owner, not maybe in sports. I gotta be honest with you. Fans completely hate Melnyk, and Melnyk does not like the fans. It is so clear. If you look at any of his interviews, he is not a hockey guy. He just wants to be this very powerful figure in a platform where he can just be the number one power figure. And that's not how you own anything. That's not how you're an owner anywhere. I don't understand how he's the owner of this team, and he needs to leave, to be honest with you. And he's not going to, which is unfortunate. But he's garbage. He's complete garbage, and he's not a good owner. This team can't fill arenas, and he's not really doing much about it. He's letting Dorion do whatever to this team, and I don't know if it's because he knows that Dorion will do anything he wants. Maybe he's a puppet for Melnyk, but Dorion has just destroyed that team. So if you're already looking and saying, okay, we can't fill arenas, what are we doing about this? Maybe you would get a better general manager, protect your best player, or if you're going to trade your best player, ensure the fact that you're going to get a great return for him, which you didn't, and maybe show the fans that you care. All he did was sit there and have this video where he's being interviewed, and it's just like, oh, I'm here for the players. This is going to be a great rebuild. And it's like, how do you know? I don't think you have no way to say this. You have Logan Brown, you have Brady Tkachuk, and you have Thomas Chabot, who are going to be great players. But Mark Stone already doesn't want to play there. And Matt Duchene's getting frustrated because he just got out of a debacle like this from Colorado. It wasn't until a season ago where Colorado was in the same position. And Duchene is now in this position again. Dorion already came out and said that Zach Smith's not going to play with the team. He's one of their most popular players. And he just says that, oh, you know, he sucked last year. We're not going to play him. We just wanted to send the message. Your team is garbage, dude. You need his leadership to get through the season. Boucher is not a good coach. It's not like his leadership's going to get you anywhere. This one's on the players to have that leadership on their own. Melnyk's terrible because he threatens fans. When you have a fan base that isn't going to games because they're so frustrated with the team, I don't think the number one strategy would be sitting there at the Winter Classic or the Heritage Classic, whatever the Canadian one. I'm just going to call it the Winter Classic. He's sitting there outside, and instead of saying, we are so passionate about this team, we're excited to be here, we're here for the fans, this is a great moment for the fans and players, he says, yeah, you know, I want to relocate this team if they don't show up. And he's like threatening them. You don't threaten people you're trying to attract. That's a joke. He has no idea what he's doing. He clearly has too big of an ego to put this aside and say, yeah, I'm doing a terrible job and I need to either step away from the game or try to rebuild properly. So, yeah, they got Kachuk, but I, that's not going to help. Because if he doesn't enjoy playing there, he's going to want to go. If Shabbat doesn't enjoy playing there, he's going to want to go. So it's a mess. Also, can we stop with Boucher being coach? He's coached for two different teams in the NHL. When he was with Tampa Bay, he did the 1-3-1, and they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They lost in Game 7 to the Bruins in a very boring series, and then the next season they missed the playoffs and play terribly. He gets fired. Everyone knows how to beat the 1-3-1. He goes off to coach in Europe. He comes back. He comes to Ottawa. He tells everyone to do the 1-3-1. They end up winning every series, get to the Eastern Conference Final in a very boring fashion. The only reason why people were excited about that team was how well Erik Karlsson was dominating, because that was his best season of his career, in my opinion. But they weren't even selling out games. They were so boring to watch. And then, the year after that, they miss the playoffs. They do terribly. Come on. Guy Boucher needs to go. I don't think he's cut out. The 1-3-1 is not how you coach in today's NHL. There's too much speed. There's too much transition game. I know you're trying to sit there and create a wall in the neutral zone and break that transition game, but you got to let your players play. And I think that really is boring for the players to kind of sit there and be like, oh, I want to go and try to get a rush out of this. Assemble the troops. We need a 1-3-1. No, he needs to go. I'm sorry. And the next big question for them is, do you know how pathetic it would be if they won the draft lottery this year and the Colorado Avalanche selected Jack Hughes? That would destroy the Ottawa Senators. Their fans would never forgive them, ever. Because you have not only lost Karlsson for a handful of players that won't be here after next year, except for Tierney, and then Jack Hughes, a superstar in the making, potential generational talent who got more points than Austin Matthews, Patrick Kane, and Jack Eichel in the USHL, is going to go to the Colorado Avalanche, who already have Nathan MacKinnon and Rantanen and Landeskog. If that happens, Colorado's going to have a dynasty instantly, and then Ottawa is going to be sitting there and being like, oh my God, we're horrible. And this season will have been a waste. When you miss a talent like that, it will be a waste. They need to play well this year. They need to play well, or else it's going to be a failure. They cannot win the draft lottery this year. That would be one of the worst things to ever happen to this team. On to a more positive subject is the Tampa Bay Lightning. Last season was their best season in franchise history. They ended up losing to the Washington Capitals in 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, but they had a stellar season, headlined by amazing seasons by Nikita Kucherov, Victor Hedman, Andrei Vasilevsky, Yanni Gourde, and Braden Point, all having breakout seasons. Major transactions, they only had one, really. They re-signed Nikita Kucherov to 8 years, $76 million contract. I don't know how Yzerman's fitting all of these in, but it might be a little difficult in the next couple of years, and we'll talk about that. This preseason, they went 4-3 with Matthew Joseph getting 8 points. Who the hell is Matthew Joseph? I don't know how Tampa Bay keeps finding these players. Their drafting is bar none the best in the NHL. Good job on them. The biggest question, what's going on with Steve Yzerman? He just built this team into a perennial cup contender. They're arguably the best team in the Eastern Conference. They're arguably the best team in the NHL. Their forward depth, immaculate. Second to none. Their defensive depth, stellar. Second to none in the Eastern Conference. Their goaltending depth, amazing. They have a Vezina candidate each year, and he's not even onto a main contract yet. Oh, he's not on a main contract yet. That's interesting. So, is Yzerman leaving before the Lightning run into cap hell? I don't know. Because you can get rid of Ryan Callahan, and you can get rid of Braden Coburn, and you can maybe shift around a couple players, and then they can re-sign Andrei Vasilevsky. But it's going to be really tight. That team is going to be pushed against the cap for a while. But they have a 5-year cup window, in my opinion. Sergachev's going to need a contract, and I think once he needs a contract, this team's going to be needing to make a huge trade. But until then, they need to win a cup in the next 2 to 3 years. Badly. Or else this is going to be a failure for them. Can they win the cup this year? Yeah, absolutely. I think they're the cup favorites from the Eastern Conference this year. I know a lot of Capitals fans will disagree with that. I know a lot of Leaf fans will disagree with that. Penguins fans included. I'm going to explain why they're not even close. Tampa Bay is hands down the best team in the Eastern Conference this year. Compare their roster to anybody else, compare their coaching staff to anybody else, this is not even close. That team is an embarrassment of riches. The envy of the Eastern Conference. The only issue is, what if they don't win the Stanley Cup this year? Is John Cooper out? They've been to a cup. They've been to several conference finals. Is Steven Stamkos an effective leader? Is John Cooper an effective coach? I think Cooper's a great coach. If you saw the way he handled the Boston Bruins series, where they got blown out in game 1, and he goes, oh, I know exactly what to do, and then they just did the gentleman's sweep and won every single game. I think they choked against Washington, but maybe they didn't. Maybe that was just a great series where Barry Trotz stepped in and said, you know what, I have my own strategy and we can do this. That was a great series. You can't fault Cooper there. I don't think they should fire Cooper if they fail this year again. I think you give him a chance. In the next 2 to 3 years, if they have this roster and they have Cooper as coach, if they don't win in 3 years, then I'd get rid of him. He clearly isn't effective if he can't win a cup with this roster in 3 years. But that's a story for another day. At this point, personally, I think they're the favorites to win the Stanley Cup in the Eastern Conference this year. And last but not least from the Atlantic Division is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Last season was also their best regular season in franchise history with 105 points. They lost to the Bruins in a 7-game series in the first round. Marner struggled at first, but rebounded to have an excellent second half of the season and an excellent postseason. Everyone knows the major transaction that occurred. They signed John Tavares 7 years, $77 million. This preseason they went 6-2. Mitch Marner led the way with 8 points in 4 games. There is definitely trouble brewing here. They have a lot of cap space, but they have to re-sign a lot of players. Marner, Nylander, and Matthews. Right now, Nylander's not playing. He missed the first game of the season due to contract disputes. Clearly, I think Dubas and the rest of Maple Leaf management was sitting there saying, oh, we got all these great kids playing. I think they're definitely just going to sign and take friendly deals with the team. No. That doesn't always happen. I think you look at teams like the Bruins, where you could sign David Pastrnak to under $7 million a season. Marchand, under $7 million a season. That's a miracle. Sweeney did an excellent job. Nylander is never going to get more points than David Pastrnak is. He's not as good as David Pastrnak. You have Leon Draisaitl making over $8 million a year. You have David Pastrnak making 6.7, and you have Philip Forsberg making about 6.5. Where would you rank William Nylander among those other 3 players? Not better than either of them. So I don't know how much he's asking for. I would hope that he's asking for 6, or he's probably asking for more than 8, to be honest with you. But I think management's looking and saying, those guys got 6. You're getting 6. So this could get ugly. What if he gets traded? A lot of Maple Leaf fans are looking at this team and saying, oh my God, we have so much talent up front. What are we doing? He could get traded. Toronto could turn this into a plus and trade him for a defenseman because they are lacking defense. You look at teams around the NHL who are struggling for forwards. Anaheim doesn't have that great of scoring depth. They could use a young player who's fast and shifty, but they have a ton of defensive prospects. Maybe they make a trade. I don't know. I don't think anyone wants to see him get traded. I think people want to see him play with the Maple Leafs and they maybe win a cup one year. How far can they get in the playoffs this year? Not very. I gotta be honest with you. Their defense has not improved. When I watched the Bruins versus the Maple Leafs last year in the playoffs, they looked terrible. Their defense was horrible. The Bruins lit them up. And they couldn't make a pass out of their own end. They couldn't cover anyone man on man. It was a disaster. If Freddie Anderson didn't have a stellar playoffs up until Game 7, I think that team would have been gone in 5 games. Because there were some games in Toronto where Anderson had superstar moments and just robbed everybody. Right now it looks like they're only banking on Dermott to really improve. And I don't really see his improvement being this catalyst for having an elite defensive core. I don't think they're anywhere close to having an elite defensive core, and I don't think Freddie Anderson's consistent enough to be an elite goaltender in the NHL. I think he's a great goaltender. I think this team has incredible offensive depth, but they also lost James Van Riemsdyk, so that's a little difficult. He's the one that gets you the dirty goals. All of his goals are within like 10 feet of the net, so you need someone else who's going to go there. Tavares isn't always there, but Tavares does help. He's a great player. They're going to get a lot of points this year. They're going to make it to the playoffs. I don't see them beating the Lightning. If they beat the Bruins, maybe they can. They almost did last year. But do I see them beating the Lightning? Absolutely not. They're so much deeper than the Leafs. It's not even funny, especially on defense. They can handle each other firepower-wise offensively, but there's no chance. Their goaltending and their defense is way better. In another tricky set of events, they lose both of their potential backup goalies when they waived them. Garrett Sparks has to be looked upon now as their backup goalie. That's a little scary. He came up a few years ago, played great a little bit, and then struggled. He's had a great time in Toronto for the Marlies. They've won a championship down there. This could be his time to really prove he's a backup goalie and potential number 1 maybe. But McElhaney had a great season last year, so it's going to be tough to replace that. So now we're on to the Metropolitan Division, and we'll start off with the Carolina Hurricanes. Last season, they didn't make the playoffs, but last season, Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen had great seasons, so there's a plus there. Major transactions, they signed Peter Mrazek to a 1-year, $1.5 million deal. Make a big trade, getting Dougie Hamilton, Michael Furland, and Adam Fox from the Calgary Flames. This preseason, they went 5-0-1 to have the best preseason record in the Metropolitan Division, which means nothing. Jacob Slavin had 8 points in 4 games. Their biggest questions, how's Brind'Amour going to do as coach? As a player, he was a great leader. He had a great voice in the locker room, smart hockey mind. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to get the best out of everybody. Those are great qualities as a coach. He's very intelligent. I think he's going to do well, to be honest with you. I don't know how well they'll do because this team has a lack of talent to be in the playoffs, but you never know if they could squeak into that 8th spot if they play the right way. Who steps up for their secondary scoring? Their offense was inept last year. And the issue was they had really good 5-on-5 stats for the past few years under Bruce Peters, but they don't have that goal scorer. Now they do, potentially. Svechnikov could be that potential goal scorer. Victor Rask had a bad year last year, but if Svechnikov can develop into a 30-goal scorer and play with Aho and Teravainen on that first line, who knows? They have good defense. Their defensive core is actually one of the better ones in the Eastern Conference. Their goaltending, though, not that great. Darling had a terrible season last year after everyone thought he'd finally make it to be a number 1 player or goaltender. How does he rebound? They got rid of Cam Ward. you're forced with either Peter Mrazek, who's either great or terrible with an attitude problem, and Darling. So it's going to be a little difficult to see who emerges as the number one. I think everyone thinks Peter Mrazek will be. What's up with Justin Falk? He was on their first pairing a few years ago. Now he's being dressed on their third defensive pairing. Is their defense that good? Yeah. To be honest with you, yeah, they have a very good defensive core. He's going to score more goals on that third pairing. He has a great shot. Defensively, I don't think he's that great compared to the other players on his team. So, I agree with that. I'm interested to see how Fogel does. Fogelli? I can't pronounce that. I'm going to say Fogelli. He had over a point per game in the preseason. It looks like he's going to make the opening night roster. So, you're kind of hoping that they can integrate more younger talent. The biggest question facing the Carolina Hurricanes this year is, where the hell can I buy their third jersey? I want that. I want the Whalers jersey so badly. I don't know which player I'll get for them because I don't really like anyone on their team, to be honest. But I would totally be a bandwagoner and get Svechnikov. I just want to rock that jersey. It's hard to find that. I want to walk around and put on my headphones and play the brass bonanza, walk down the street. Like, everyone's looking at me like I'm on meth. It doesn't matter. That's a sick jersey. In my opinion, that's the best third jersey that's come out this season, and I want it badly. Badly. Up next, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets. Last season, they lost in the first round to the Washington Capitals after almost defeating them, but an amazing turnaround had them on their way out. Artemi Panarin thrived in his first season with them. Point per game player, their best player. Honestly, he's the best offensive player they've ever had. I think he's better than Rick Nash was. Pierre-Luc Dubois and Seth Jones had great seasons. Jones looks like he's going to be a perennial candidate to be a Norris Trophy winner at some point. He's injured this year, so we'll see what happens, but I think moving forward for the next 5 years, everyone's going to be having him in the top 10 votes for Norris Trophy. Major transactions, they re-signed Boone Jenner to a 4-year, $15 million contract, and they signed Riley Nash from the Boston Bruins to a 3-year, $8.25 million contract. This preseason, they went 3-5, but Cam Atkinson had 7 points in 3 games. That's promising. The biggest question, how do they handle the first part of the season without Seth Jones? Their defense looks a little banged up right now. Seth Jones is a star, and 5-on-5, Columbus was great last year. It was really their special teams where they faltered. They were in the bottom 5 of the NHL for power play and penalty kill, and that's with a healthy Seth Jones. So I think John Tortorella needs to step up here and come together with a strategy to say, hey, I don't even care if we're top 10 in either of these. We need to be middle of the pack, because bottom 5 in both of these instantly says I'm going to get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs regardless of who I play. Can Pierre-Luc Dubois step up as their number one center? They used to have a number one center in Ryan Johansson, but it didn't look like he wanted to play there, and he was shipped off for Seth Jones. That was a great trade. I think Seth Jones is a better player than Johansson, but they still don't have that number one center, and I think that hurts you. You really need that number one center. If you look at Montreal, they haven't played well without a number one center. And you look at all the teams that have won the cup, and their center depth goes 3 centers deep minimum that can all play at least second line. So if he can develop into a 30-goal scorer, 60 to 70 point player, two-way game, that's great for this team. But can they re-sign Bobrovsky and Artemi Panarin? I think they could probably get Bobrovsky to play with them for longer. He's really humble. His career flourished in Columbus. He's won 2 Vezinas. He wasn't really doing it in Philadelphia. I think the pressure there is a little too much. But Artemi Panarin doesn't want to be there. It's pretty obvious. He's made a point in saying he wants to be either making a ton of money in Columbus or a really good amount of money in a place like the New York, specifically the Rangers. I think the Bruins were trying to trade for him, but I don't really see him wanting to come to Boston. So if they don't give him the bank, then I see him being gone, and they might really need to trade him. They should get a first pick minimum and try to get a center and someone that can probably replace his scoring. And unfortunately, the biggest question for them is, can they win a playoff series? Right now, no. I really don't think so. I think they can squeak into the playoffs. I think their special teams are garbage, and they cannot win a playoff series with garbage special teams. I think John Tortorella has flourished with them. He has found a renaissance period. He's still a great coach. He's become friendlier. He's become more approachable by the team. So if he can just get the special teams together, and if they can overcome these injury issues, maybe, I say maybe, they can win a playoff series. But they would have to beat Pittsburgh or Washington or Philadelphia. And I just don't see that happening with this current roster. So it's going to be a difficult chance for them. I am hoping for them to do it. And I think their fans are definitely hoping for them to win a playoff series. But it's going to be tough. Up next is the New Jersey Devils. Last year they lost in the first round of the playoffs to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their season was highlighted by Taylor Hall winning the Hart Trophy after having a stellar season, getting 40 more points than Nico Hischier to lead the team in scoring. He did this by himself. That was a treat for fans to watch, and it was a treat for everyone to see him finally do well. He was traded from Edmonton for Adam Larson. That's kind of embarrassing. And right after they get McDavid, and they almost made it to the Western Conference Finals in that second season. So he's kind of sitting there like, oh my God, I never make the playoffs. He dug deep. He was tired of it. He's a leader. He's going to be captain of that team soon. He digs in deep, has a superstar season. They get to the playoffs. That's a win. I don't care if they lost in a gentleman's sweep. That was a great season for them. Other notable storylines were Will Butcher had a great season and Nico Hischier had a great season as well. Major transactions? None worth noting. They didn't really do anything. Is that a good move? Nope. Not at all. This preseason, they went 2-2-2. Kyle Palmieri led the way with 5 points. Biggest questions? Can Taylor Hall repeat what he did last year? I feel like he dug into the cryptic vault and got this talent out of nowhere and just said, I'm going to carry this team. And I don't know if I can do it again, but I'm going to do it this year. If he can do it this year, great. I think it'll be a little easier for him. I think Hischier is going to maybe get to that 60-70 point range, but everyone else is going to have to step up as well. Maybe a full season of Vatanen helps their defensive game and helps their transition game into like more of a speedy transition where they can capitalize off of turnovers. But he's going to need to repeat if they want to make the playoffs because this team has no depth. Was doing nothing this offseason the right thing to do? No. Look at their defense and look at their depth forwards. That doesn't scream, I'm going to make it past the first round of the playoffs. It doesn't. I think they need a little bit of help there. Which Corey Schneider are they going to get? When Corey Schneider came to New Jersey, he was amazing, and he's been amazing. He has one of the best save percentages in the league during that time, some of the most amount of shutouts, and the lowest goals against average. And in the past 2 years, he has not done that. So you're wondering what team or what player you're going to get from him. I'm really hoping he rebounds this year because Kincaid was looking like their goalie. I don't know if it's a confidence issue. I don't know if it's the defense, but he really needs to come back and say, oh, hey, you guys, I forgot. I'm actually Corey Schneider, and I'm going to play really well this year. If he does well, if Hall does well, I see them making the playoffs again, and I think that puts Columbus on the hot seat. Now we're moving on to the New York Islanders. Last season, they missed the playoffs. They had one of the best offenses in the NHL, which meant they had one of the worst defenses in the NHL. Let me correct that. They had hands down the worst defense in the NHL. 2 storylines were Anders Lee, Matt Barzal, and Josh Bailey had great seasons. Major transactions? They signed Robin Lehner to a 1-year, $1.5 million contract. They signed Leo Komarov to 4 years, $12 million. They signed Thomas Hickey, 4 years, $10 million. And they traded with the Toronto Maple Leafs to get Matt Martin back. This preseason, they went 5-3. Matt Barzal had 8 points. Biggest questions. Can Barzal handle being the number one center? He played really well this last season, and he had more points than Tavares. But Tavares played on the first line, which means he was facing the toughest defenders each night. So I'm interested to see how Barzal kind of handles that. And who are his line mates going to be? Is he going to play with Eberle? Is he going to play with Lee? Is he going to play with Bailey? Who knows? But I do think he's going to produce, to be honest with you. And I think all three of the players I just mentioned are also going to play well. It's just going to be a little difficult. I wonder if Josh Ho-Sang will ever catch a break with this team, because he came in and played pretty decent for a stretch. And I would have thought with the departure of Tavares and some key talent that management gives him a shot. But apparently he didn't have a great preseason, was cut pretty early. Maybe he's just not going to make it. I think he can make it. I think the fans want to see him make it. But I guess we need to see more from him. This would be his chance to do it. The second biggest question for them is, how does this team do with Barry Trotz as head coach? When you look at it, you're going to have better defense. They're going to be blocking shots. They're going to have a team system going. I think they're going to be more coordinated. I think the offense is going to come back and help the defense. Their defense does not look good. They do not have a good defensive core. So their offensive forwards need to come back and play a better two-way game, because that was such a bad season last year. And I think it kind of exposed Tavares a little bit. A lot of people were saying Tavares was not a good two-way center. He was all offense. He'd miss his assignments, and you could see it. He had to play against other teams' top lines, and their top lines would completely outperform Tavares. I think Tavares might be an overrated superstar, where he's not as good defensively, but he cashes in on the offensive chances. And with Trotz as coach, their offense isn't going to be top 10 in the NHL anymore. It's going to be like 16th or something like that. But their defense won't be worse than the NHL. They'll also be 16th or something like that. Unless Greiss sucks at goalie, but I don't think he will. I think Greiss is a good goalie, and I think he's going to have a chance. Which leads to the biggest question of all. How do we celebrate with Garth Snow not being GM anymore? Let's just give yourself a pat on the back here. That is ridiculous that he was GM for that long. This guy, the Islanders in general over the past 30 years have had nothing to work with for general managers. Everyone knows that Mike Milbury ruined that team by getting rid of Chara, Luongo, Olli Jokinen, Hossa. I mean, there's so many players that he's just gone. Doesn't matter. Then they have Garth Snow, who just did nothing. I don't know how you do nothing for so long. This team had nothing to work with. How as a fan, how do you support that? You can't. That's so difficult. So just give yourself a pat on the back. I don't know how long Lamoriello is going to be there for, but anything's better than Snow. The only thing that disappoints me is he's still within the organization. I think you got to send him to another, just get him out. Fire him. He has done nothing good for that team at all. A couple miles up the road, you have the New York Rangers. Last season, they missed the playoffs as well. But they finally started the rebuild with a letter to their fans stating that they're going to make an effort by trading away some players, acquiring younger talent and draft picks, and restocking the team. Major transactions, they re-signed Jimmy Vesey to a 2-year extension for $4.5 million. Brady Shea signs a 6-year extension for $31.5 million. Kevin Hayes signs a 1-year, basically a tryout deal for $5.2 million to say, all right, you need to have a good season this year. You're gone. You're not going to be part of the rebuild. Ryan Spooner got re-signed to a 2-year, $8 million contract. And they made an effort to get Adam McQuaid from the Bruins, which I think they win this trade. I don't think the Bruins really wanted McQuaid's contract, but I think the Rangers really needed his leadership and presence on the blue line. This preseason, they went 3-2-1. Pavel Buchnevich had 7 points. Their biggest questions: who's going to be doing the scoring this season? If you take a look at their roster from last season, they had 1 player above 50 points last season. Are you kidding me? That instantly says, yeah, we're not really doing well. We have no offense to show for it. They have Nemestikov, Buchnevich, Spooner, Hayes, Kreider. Someone on that line needs to step up. Those are 2 forward lines that can do some scoring, along with Mika Zibanejad. Someone needs to get above 60. They still have Zuccarello. I mean, where's the offense? Can Kevin Shattenkirk stay healthy? I think part of the reason their transition game was so bad was because Shattenkirk was out. I don't think Shattenkirk's a good defensive defenseman, but I think his puck-moving skills and his offensive abilities make him very valuable to the team. And the forwards didn't really have anyone that was like, oh, hey, I'm going to get you the puck. So I think they missed that last year. How's David Quinn going to do as their new head coach? He had a great time at Boston University, but Boston University also gets all the best players in the collegiate system, so he's constantly stacked with talent. Right now you're looking at a team that isn't constantly stacked with talent, and he's really going to have to make sure his system's ready for mediocre NHL players to do well and thrive. I think they have young talent right now that will produce goals soon, but they're completely missing the playoffs this season, and he has to know this. One of the more emotional moments for the Rangers is going to be, what do they do with Henrik Lundqvist? He specifically said he wants to be there for part of this rebuild. But is there a point where you trade the guy? He has not won a cup yet. Everyone's going to sit there and be like, he's the best player to never win a cup. I mean, Marcel Dion is right now, but you look at him and it's like, okay, he's clearly the best goalie to never win a cup. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. He already is a Hall of Famer, to be honest with you. He has a couple of years left. Do you trade him to a team like Calgary or St. Louis, who has a decent team? St. Louis is better, obviously, but they need a good goalie. You could get 2 to 3 years of goaltending out of him, and where he could potentially win a cup. And if you traded him to a team like St. Louis, then maybe he has a shot. But is it fair to keep him there? Does he want to stay there? Do you want him there? That's tough. I think he's going to stay there, obviously. I don't think he wants to move, but you kind of feel bad for the guy and want to see him win the cup. Up next, we have the Rangers' best friends, the Philadelphia Flyers. Last year, the Flyers lost in the first round of the playoffs to the Pittsburgh Penguins in a pretty overwhelming series for the Flyers. But to be noted, Giroux, Provorov, Couturier, Voracek, Gostisbehere, Konechny, and Samheim all had great seasons, and this team looks stacked for the future. Major transactions, they got James Van Riemsdyk for 5 years, $35 million. This preseason, they went 4-3-1. Vorobiev had 7 points. The biggest question for them is, can Giroux keep up his renaissance? He struggled for a few years, and last season he got over 100 points for the first time, having Sean Couturier be his center. Couturier needs to stay as a center. That line was fantastic. I mentioned a lot of good first lines earlier in the program, but this line was also one of the top 5 lines in the NHL, in my opinion. And Couturier is emerging as a clear Selke favorite for the future. Can he win a Selke this year? Absolutely. If anyone gets injured, he's clearly going to win it. I don't see Kopitar repeating what he did last year. I think Bergeron will come up and be a strong candidate, but Couturier is going to be up there as well. I feel like it'll be Barkov, Couturier, and Bergeron up for the Selke this year. How far can this team go? If you look at their forwards, they have a great forward group, but only half of their defense strikes me as great. You look at Andrew McDonald and Radko Gudas, and you're like, yeah, these guys are pretty terrible. I don't want them on my team. And neither should you. I don't know why McDonald's still here. And I think the team likes Radko Gudas. I think the rest of the NHL hates Radko Gudas. As a bottom pairing guy, maybe. I just see him as a poor skater. But, and, clearly not good with decision making, especially when he's doing dirty stuff. We'll see what happens. I don't think their defense can really say, yeah, we're going to do well. So I don't see them getting past the first round for that reason. The other reason is Brian Elliott. I think Brian Elliott's at that stage now where he's like past the twilight of his career. I think he'll get them 30 wins this year because their team is good, but I don't see him as a superstar, and I think he's going to be on his way out soon to be replaced by Stolarz or Hart because they have great goaltending prospects. Once their defense develops, and once Hart or Stolarz comes in and becomes a top goalie, that team's going to go far in the playoffs. The only issue is, can they do that before Giroux and Voracek are old? I think Nolan Patrick, if he continues to develop, will be the replacement for them, but they need a little bit more prospects in the pool to develop, and I don't know how long they can wait for an elite goalie to come in. On the other side of Pennsylvania, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins lost in the second round of the playoffs last season to the Washington Capitals, which seems like voodoo magic to most people. I don't think anyone would have ever said Washington beat the Penguins because of the past 10 years. Maybe the past 20 to 30 years, because even if you look back in the 90s, they still had their Washington's number. But they finally did it, and they lost. So congratulations. Malkin quietly had a stellar season. I think everyone was talking about Giroux, McKinnon, Hart, McDavid, and Malkin's like, hey, I also had 100 points last year for the first time in a while. Phil Kessel rode along on those coattails and also had a great season, but he was a minus player. So I think this team has a lot of offense, but not a lot of defense. And the last story that kind of highlighted their season last year was Matt Murray struggled. He had injuries, and then consistency, he just wasn't there. I don't think he was that elite goaltender that won them 2 Stanley Cups. And he needs to really kind of prove that he can make it through a regular season as well as the playoffs. For major transactions, they signed Jack Johnson to 5 years, $16.25 million contract, and they re-signed Jamie Alexiak to 3 years, $6.4 million. Preseason, they went 2-3-1. Brassard, Crosby, and Cullen each had 4 points. The biggest questions: how far can this offense carry the team? Look at their defense right now and tell me they're even in the top 5 in the Eastern Conference, because I don't think they are. I think Letang's still good, but I don't think they really have anyone that's kind of proven to be a depth defender past the second pairing. So I just don't think they're going to be in the Cup prediction this year. Clearly they have Crosby, Malkin still, and Kessel, so they're going to go far, but I see their defense, and I see a team like Washington's offense, or Tampa Bay's offense, or the Bruins' offense, or Toronto's offense, Flyers' offense even. I just don't see them getting very far. I think an elite team will stop them. I don't see them getting past Tampa Bay in the playoffs. Absolutely not. An interesting question this year is, will Crosby have a rebound season? Now, take that lightly. Crosby had a great season last year. Crosby always has a great season. But I think there are some fans who are looking up there right now and saying, why isn't Crosby having over 100 points again? Why isn't he getting 50 goals? I think it's because he's taking more of a two-way approach to his game now than he used to. But maybe you want him getting 100 points again? I don't know. So is this a season where he can get over 100 points and go up to McDavid and say, hey, I'm still the best player in the league? I don't know. That'd be interesting, though. I'd like to see him get it from a fantasy standpoint. He's not on my team, but still, my own fantasy, it's like, yeah, he's back up there again. I want to see him at number 1. Can Jim Rutherford get them a defenseman? Can they even trade anyone? Who would you trade right now from that team to get a defenseman? Would you trade Brassard? If you trade Brassard, they don't have good center depth anymore. You'd have to trade one of their wingers, which they can't really afford because they finally have enough wingers for Crosby and Malkin. They're kind of stuck here. That's why I don't think they're going to make it past the first or second round. I think they get past the first round, but I think the Capitals are going to have their number again this year, and you could end up seeing the Capitals and Lightning again. Another issue is Matt Murray going to stay healthy? Last season he was injured, and when you have Jarry and DeSmith playing, they got lit up. I mean, the average score of those games was like 5-4, either win or loss. So, yeah, their team is wide open, but I don't really know what you do if you have them in nets. Clearly, you're not going to make it anywhere in the playoffs. But if Murray gets injured in the regular season for too long, they might not make the playoffs either. So you need to count on him to have any chance of success this season. Now, finally, we're going to wrap things up with the Washington Capitals. Last season, they finally won the Stanley Cup. Oh my God. What a moment for Ovechkin. What a moment for Capitals fans. 40 plus years, nothing. They finally get it. All that pain, gone. Other notable stories, Ovechkin got his 600th goal. Michael Kempny comes in and becomes an amazing factor in their Stanley Cup run. Braden Holtby struggled, and then he blossomed in re-becoming that elite goaltender. Maybe that time off really helped him rediscover his game, rather. For major transactions, there was only one. They re-signed Tom Wilson to a 6-year, $31 million contract, which I think is pretty bad. I don't think he's worth that much money, and it's going to be interesting seeing him produce really well with that money sitting out for 20 games with the suspension that we talked about earlier. This preseason, they went 2-3-2. Kuznetsov led the way with 4 points. Their biggest question, how well does Tom Reardon do as head coach? He knows the team well. He's a great candidate to be their coach. He's been there for years. He said he's going to keep the same system, just tightening up the defense a little bit. After watching the first game of the regular season against the Bruins last night, yeah, I think he's going to do really well. Obviously, it's not going to keep up, but I think this team's going to be fine. He's basically just coming in with a little bit tighter defense in the same system. He knows the team well. I don't see him having any problems here. What does the team do about Tom Wilson's behavior? At some point, does he sit down with management and they say, look, we just signed you to a huge contract. You are not out here to be doing this reckless behavior anymore. You need to grow up a little bit. You can still be intimidating, but you can't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to headshot this guy for no reason. No, you can't do that anymore. I think you're going to reach a point where he can't do this, and they're going to have to sit down with him and discipline him. And the last big question for them, can they repeat? I don't know. I think they're going to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals this year, but I don't see them beating Tampa Bay again unless Tampa Bay chokes. I think they're going to do well, but they might be tired. I'm not sure how this team will do with the hangover. I don't know if they've been partying a lot or if that's just a meme that's being used. I'm not really a fan of memes, so I'm going to say they're going to be fine. The Penguins proved you can do it, but many teams have proven that you can't redo it and you can't repeat. So if they can, great. We're all rooting for them, but I don't think they will. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to me on the second podcast. I know this was very long, but I really just wanted to get these previews out of the way. I was getting tired of having them sit here. I just want to talk about current events in the NHL and then, make it an easy day. About an hour podcast each. So if you'd like to keep following, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. And remember, if you want to donate, you don't have to, but if you feel like you would and like the content that's coming, I still produce these weekly. I'll be producing these weekly all throughout the season. And I have a Patreon page if you'd like to contribute. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to give them to me. I'd love to hear them. Thank you very much and have a great day.